Brian, but as you know, there's always a helicopter that shadows the president's motorcade and leads it a little bit, and we've just seen a helicopter off in the distance there. I mentioned earlier that there has been an increase in security here the last 25 or 30 minutes. We've had some flyovers in the last hour and 20 minutes of F-16 fighter planes, about 3 of those flyovers with 2 of them. And again, security tightened even further here in the last 20 or 30 minutes as we await the President of the United States. There have been a number of teams. They've been alternating them on 12-hour shifts, going in, working in the area there that's been so damaged by the fire and the collapse of the ceiling of the outer and the second rim in, the second ring here of the Pentagon. They have been looking and searching and so forth. These teams have had a lot of experience. I talked with the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Chief. He said they have done 5 earthquakes, and this is the 3rd terrorist attack that they have been dispatched to. Oklahoma City and the bombings in Africa of the embassies, and now here at the Pentagon, practically in their backyard of Fairfax County, Virginia. We have also fire and rescue teams and dog teams from Virginia Beach, Virginia. So they're trying to give these people rest after about 12 hours or so before they go back on the job. Again, structural difficulties and deficiencies there are causing some problems. They can't really get into the center of that gash area where the plane crashed at 600 miles an hour with 30,000 pounds of jet fuel on board. If you look just to the right, maybe we can zoom in on that. To the right of the gash where the plane turned sideways and flew into the side of the building, it looks like maybe a flag is about to be unfurled there. We've seen some people and some activity up there, and so we suspect that maybe there could be a banner or some kind of a flag that would be unfurled once the president gets here. The White House said that the president didn't want to come any earlier, certainly, to interfere with the rescue effort. But unfortunately, the prospect of finding anybody alive in that building that's so charred or in that debris is quite remote. So the president wants to come over and shake hands with some of the rescue workers and express the gratitude of the American government for what they're doing and their attempts to try to find somebody who is alive in this building.
John, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a flag or a banner. There are expressions like that all over this country. Certainly here in the New York metropolitan area, there's a banner visible from the heavily traveled Route 3 in New Jersey that says simply, pray. Construction workers put up bed sheets in Times Square last night saying, pray for the victims and God bless America. And flags are coming out where flags previously weren't, and movie theaters are putting up in plastic letters expressions for the dead, for this country. And it's happening in big cities and small towns from coast to coast as this country is, you know, a little over a day after receiving such a sharp concussion in the form of these jet aircraft that have landed in 2 of our metropolitan centers and damaged or destroyed 2 such big public landmarks. John, back to the person en route to you. What is it, the Memorial Bridge? He'll be taken across the Potomac, and then it's a very short drive to where you are. We would expect so, and certainly in the motorcade and in this situation with security as it is, the president is not expected to stop at all for red lights or traffic or what have you. And we know of the threat because, as you've been reporting, and we have this afternoon, that not only was the White House the target of this Flight 77, the 757 that crashed into this building, also the President Air Force One was a target yesterday, so seriously that the Secret Service had the plane zigzag to Barksdale Air Force Base in Alabama and then fly on out to Nebraska, and the President didn't, of course, get back till early last evening. So security is very much of a concern here.
Don Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, I thought had some very poignant things today when he said at his news conference, we are now seeing the definition, he said, of a new battlefield, a 21st century battlefield, new for this country. And I think the main message that he wanted to point out is, I'm old enough to remember as a kid of World War II when there was a saying, loose lips sink ships.
Right.
And his message was intelligence should be held very, very closely because it can cost lives. And he called on the men and women in military and in civilian service who are privy to secret things to keep them secret as we go about the process of tracking down those responsible for this and bringing them to justice.
I was also going to mention the First Lady was pressed into service today. She visited 3 hospitalized military personnel who leaped to safety immediately after that jet flew into the Pentagon. Mrs. Bush pitching in today. The whole city of Washington wrapped up in what they've watched unfold. And John, the description of Jim Miklashevsky earlier today of the last moments of the flight that caused the damage we're looking at the Pentagon, how they apparently, you know, it is not easy to crash a large commercial jetliner. First of all, you're fighting computers that have landing programs that don't like and don't let things happen like too swift a descent. You've got to know what you're doing. The plane does not want to go down that steeply. It's hard to keep your airspeed and hit a ground target. Again, this deed that's been called so dastardly, this is not what a commercial jetliner was built to do. They are built to land safely. And John, apparently, as we've been saying, that the Pentagon was an alternate target and not the primary target, and one shudders to think of had it gone the other way.
Yes, indeed. When it came here approaching, after passing once and circling and coming back by the Pentagon, it overflew it the first time, we were told. It came back and made about a 270-degree turn here, clipped the top of a tree. There's a light pole down over there, but then maintained altitude and crashed into the side of the building. Governor Gilmore of Virginia was saying last night when he walked over there, he was looking, where's the big crater where the plane went down? There was no crater. The pilot was able to keep that plane up so it would smack right into the side of the Pentagon full force at 600 miles an hour, leading people to believe certainly that one of the terrorists was at the controls of that plane and was able to keep it in the air and keep it right flying into the side of the building.
John, that's absolutely extraordinary. And there is further speculation today that the plane that went down in Pennsylvania went down there, and we use the bizarre term, thanks to several people on board. We say that instead of knocking out another monument in Washington, there's now anecdotal and telephone evidence that there was a struggle on board, that several of the male passengers voted and decided to try to overtake the crew, and it is surmised that they perhaps brought that jet down prematurely, as it might have been. There was a report yesterday it was en route to Camp David, which is notoriously hard to find from the air in the Maryland mountains, but it was en route back to Washington to take out, again, perhaps a different venerated monument in that city, and instead it went down east of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And there was certainly terror aboard American Airlines Flight 77 that flew into the Pentagon here. Horrible stories of all of the passengers herded to the back of the airplane, were told to use the earphone or cell phones to call their loved ones and say goodbye. Just absolutely frightening words. There is just story after story coming from all of the aircraft of the use of cell phones and the last minutes being so tragic.
John, I want to bring into our conversation a special guest from Washington, with the understanding that we may have to interrupt him should the president arrive during our conversation. We're fortunate to be joined by Judge William Webster, former FBI and CIA director. Judge Webster, we have not spoken since this horrific tragedy yesterday, and since your background is so much in the intelligence gathering and law enforcement community, what went wrong here that allowed such an intricate plan to be carried out?
I think we'd make a very big mistake, Brian, if we tried to determine what went wrong and we ought to be focusing instead on all the opportunities we can to learn exactly what happened, by whom, so that they can be properly held accountable. I think the first reactions, concern for the victims of the crashes and the terrorist acts was the right motive. It shows what kind of a country we are. We've taken care of that, and we're now focused on what happened and where we go next. There'll be plenty of opportunity to say what could have gone wrong. There were several places along the way that will be examined. Access to the airplanes by 4 separate teams is one. Whether or not there was intelligence that was available and not utilized. Terrorism is one of the toughest of all types of hostile activities to get a handle on in a cellular activity where the planning is kept in a very small number of people. We know of about 12 people perhaps who may have been involved in the actual flight of the airplane. We don't know how many other people were involved, but this is not an introduction of a nuclear device to the United States or chemical or biological weapons or any of the things that are that sophisticated. They had to have pilots. That's important. We have to know how they got into this country, if indeed they came from outside the country. We shouldn't form any judgments, I think, at this point, other than to recognize that our country is behaving extraordinarily well in the true traditions of people who revere human life, who love democracy, who love order in their society, and are not being bent by this project. We took a lot of damage, but we're still standing and going forward with our work, and I think that's the best we can say about it.
Well, you've been talking, Judge Webster. We've watched a scene play out that'll put a lump in the throat of many a person who served the United States and some who haven't. They appear to be firefighters wearing yellow turnout gear helmets, unfurling an American flag at the topmost part of the roof there at the Pentagon, a flag that'll be visible in the next few minutes when the president pulls up to the Pentagon. They're evidently resituating the flag now in a different location. Judge Webster, stand by for just a moment. We're joined also by our own Lester Holt for what I understand is our first live report from the kind of ghoulish moonscape known as Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan, where World Trade once stood. Lester?
It is a sight to behold, Brian. I am standing right on the West Side Highway. If you're familiar with New York, this is the road that separates the World Financial Center and the South Tower of the World Trade Center. I'm about 100 yards from what's left of the South Tower. The rubble at the base of the building stands, I'm going to estimate, 6-7 stories tall. I can't even begin to imagine what's beneath there. There is still a little bit of flame. There are just, I would say, maybe the framework of, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 stories of the building here, just a little bit like a kid's erector set still standing. Next to it is an older building that's been undergoing renovation. I don't know the address. There's a Morton Steakhouse here. I'm told this building is in some danger, although I don't think it's imminent. I still see workers in the streets here. There's work highway now that moves. First time after covering this desk and now looking directly into the wreckage, I am seeing what an immense task this is going to be. Brian, I am looking here now at cars on top of cars. I've counted 3, 4, 5 ambulances destroyed, turned over, a couple of fire trucks destroyed. Sticking up in the rubble there, it looks like an orange backboard, what a paramedic uses to carry the injured away. The streets are, I don't know, the dust and debris and pieces of 3 feet high. Wind.
Lester, we're losing you. It's some evidence of the problem people are still having with cell phone contact down there in the Lower Manhattan. We've lost contact with Lester Holt, at least lost dependable contact with Lester Holt. Ashley Banfield, with the caveat that we've got to break away for Bush's arrival at the Pentagon any second here. I know you have something to add from down there.
We just were moved 2 blocks north. Here's the reason why. We've been able to put some information together. Robert Morello was working at One Liberty Plaza, which if we pan up and beyond me to the black building, it's a building just beyond this black building. What happened when you were working? What happened when the last part of the World Trade Tower, or excuse me, where the Tower 2 came down? What was the vibration like? What happened to the building?
Okay, the crumblings of the buildings from the World Trade Center, the impact hit the ground so hard. We have a big hole there, and it must have gave the vibration to the other buildings. Now we have a building behind the One Liberty Plaza and behind the Millennium, which is 40-story high brick building, and it got a big giant crack. It just started cracking out, windows started popping.
You were in that building at the time?
Yes, was in the building inside the lobby.
And they started evacuating you and all of the other emergency workers?
Everybody started running.
All right, and also we should make mention that this Millennium building, which is the big black glass building, you also said that it's buckling as well?
It's also buckling. It's bending down out of shape. So it looks like any time it's going to fall down too.
And had you heard other emergency workers say that it was indeed the vibrations from the final collapse of the World Trade Tower?
Well, I got the informations from the vibrations from the Inspector Generals and the Commissioner of the Department of Building and Human Resources that say that the vibration must impact the building, make the building crack up, and that's why the building is breaking little by little.
Okay, Robert Morello, thank you. So that's at least a bit of an explanation as to why there was such an emergency. The crane that was trying to bring down...
Okay. All right, Ashley, and I think
the crane that was trying to bring it down caused the problem.
Is that Liberty Plaza we're talking about, the old U.S. Steel building?
I believe it is, but okay. It's the building directly behind the black one that you're seeing just behind me. But they're both in peril of coming down, Tom. And also, Brian, just quickly, this has now become an evacuation route. So we've been watching emergency vehicle after emergency vehicle coming through here, and also some of the big heavy construction front-end loaders and bulldozers that have been coming through as well. They're trying to get as many people and equipment out as possible at this point in case that big one and the other one does come down.
Ashley Banfield in Lower Manhattan, thank you as some heavy equipment comes out. Two pieces of business. Number one, live at the Pentagon real quickly, the flag that we saw being unfurled is now on full display down the side of the building, not at all on the rooftop. A much better display for the Commander-in-Chief and President of the United States due to arrive any second. Number two, we have a new videotape just into us. A new amateur video that has arrived of, look at this new angle of the second plane impacting the World Trade Center. All of it is extraordinary. We get kind of inured to all this videotape as wallpaper, and you're watching, in effect, people die in the process. We've watched it all collectively as a nation now for 24 hours plus. It never gets any more pleasant. It never gets less shocking. The law of averages, I heard someone theorizing today, we may see some amateur/tourist home video from the mall in Washington. Not every day a commercial jetliner flies down the length of the mall, takes one swoop over the Pentagon, goes near the White House, and then lands in the Pentagon. So while perhaps investigators have their hands on something like that, it may be a matter of time before we see it in the news media. Last night from Associated Press Television, we saw a new snippet of tourist videotape from Lower Manhattan. Someone heard the sound of a commercial jet, panned up quickly to see the first impact. That was the first moving image we had ever seen of the initial impact into the initial tower of the two. And again, most people assumed that had been an aviation accident. This is before and after. We've juxtaposed these of the New York skyline, World Trade Center yesterday, and now with it gone. Absolutely incredible how to remove two 110-story twin towers from the thoroughly recognizable and unique skyline of the city of New York. But again, these new images, different pieces of videotape, especially given yesterday's, and here is again this different view. And these are substantial twin-engine jetliners that we are talking about here, not commuter aircraft, not private aircraft. These have many, many pounds of thrust and tens of thousands of pounds. Here's the video we were talking about. This came in last night about 2 o'clock in the morning. This was first aired from AP TV. Watch this, pan up. There's the initial impact. Imagine how horrifying that was to see from Lower Manhattan. Only exceeded in its horror by the next impact, the second aircraft, when the nation kind of got it and realized this was no accident. It exceeded the law of averages to have 2 aircraft, and think of those souls on board, especially those who sensed perhaps that impact was ahead. The poor souls who lost their lives, along with all of those in the offices who did not know what was about to hit them. This is amateur video from today. That's why they call them New York's finest and bravest. They are in there today. The orange vessels would be body bags. This work, as we were warned last night by experts, will go on for not days, but weeks. This may be the toughest and most unpleasant work in the known world. Ask anyone who responded at Oklahoma City, Khobar Towers, all of the places that have since gained their fame because of tragedy. It is not bodies, but parts of bodies often that we are talking about here. The specialist dogs are already on the scene. More will come in. By the way, Russia had a team all set on the runway last night asking U.S. approval to send them to the United States to help in this. Here, yet another view. We've learned a lot about the metallurgy and building construction and what can happen when a vessel flying that quickly, jet-propelled, hits a building built that sturdily, and that's what can happen right there. Just been told from our producer, Alice Ree, NBC News producer in Lower Manhattan, that Building 3, and the layout is by now pretty familiar for people who've been following the story, could be about to collapse. There are markers, there are usual signs that things are about to go. Chief among them, the kind of yawning sound that a building can make, and breaking glass. When windows start popping, especially along the front facade, that's when people start getting people out of the way. Quickly, John Palmer, anything over where you are?
Brian, we've just gotten a message from the pool reporter indicating that they're going to be feeding some material of the president meeting with some of these rescue workers here. As we look over to the scene here, we see the American flag, which, as we've seen, that has been unfurled. It's about a 3-story high flag. Just to the right, as we look at it, of the main part of the destruction on the west side of the
I'm sorry, John, just to our viewers, we just saw a building collapse in Manhattan. That was taped from yesterday afternoon. I apologize, John. Go ahead.
Okay, so we have not, in short, seen the president at this point, but we believe he is here. He certainly had time to be here. We're on the west side of the building. This is not, of course, the main entrance to the Pentagon, so we suspect that he's gone around to the main entrance and perhaps gone in that way to meet with some of the rescue workers to say thank you. Perhaps he's also met with Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and some of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and so perhaps with the secretaries of the various services. We don't know, but we don't see him here at this particular time here. But we have gotten word that there is going to be video, certainly, of the president taken by the pool camera, traveling with him in the motorcade as he greets some of these workers who've been going around the clock here for a couple of days.
All of it keeps us humble, John. It won't be the first time nor the last that the Secret Service has done something out of the view of the always so smart news media. It appears they have been able to get Mr. Bush into the Pentagon outside of our view and without our knowing it. So bravo to them, and totally understandable against this backdrop of heavy security. We want to check in real quickly, again, given the possibility of further collapse in Lower Manhattan. Ashley Banfield, do you have anything down there?
I think we might have an explanation for what you're seeing. Building 3, according to Robert Morello, who I was interviewing before, who's working with the New York City Police Department, Building 3 may have come down in the last couple of minutes. Apparently they've been working on it, trying to tear it down all day. This is not apparently in the direct vicinity of where this immediate security risk is, where they were evacuating a lot of the workers from. Robert, if you could just come back in here and explain to me, tell me what it was about Building 3 that you knew about today, and why it may have just come down.
Okay, Building 3 was brought down. They evacuated the area first, and then they just tear it down because Building 3 was already falling down. It's only about 15 to 20-story height. That was not the reason everybody was evacuating. Everybody was evacuating because
Pentagon.
the tall building, they just cracked up.
Sorry, Ashley, we have to cut away from you and go to the Pentagon for what we're seeing on the screen. John?
Yes, Brian, we are seeing a helicopter just came overhead. We do not know whether the president is in that or not. It certainly does not have the presidential seal on it, but that's understandable. In these circumstances, they probably wouldn't want to put the seal on it.
Yeah, that's true.
But we don't know whether it's the president. There is, thus far, we hear another helicopter coming. As you know, often the president always, in fact, is accompanied by Secret Service agents, and we hear another helicopter perhaps coming in here. So we're going to keep watch on this situation and see what's happening. We were told that the president was going to motorcade, but again, the Secret Service can change things at the last moment for security reasons, and perhaps they've done that. We'll keep an eye.
Okay, John, while that is one of the so-called white tops, as they're known, that, as you know, as you pointed out, and having covered these things for so long, that is not one of the big Sikorskis that normally carries the president, while it has U.S. markings, the flag, and all the other appropriate colorings. And of course, as we see now, it seems full of military personnel. So the president, we have every reason to believe, is otherwise in the Pentagon via motorcade. There are a number of routes from the highway entrances underground into garages that are secure. And again, given the present backdrop, totally understandable that they would bring him in with as little fanfare as possible. We have to take the White House at its word that they are there for two reasons: so that the president can see the devastation from yesterday's attack, and so that the president can pay tribute and thanks to the salvage workers, the rescue workers who have been on the job since impact yesterday. You know, it bears repeating, what we're talking about here is a commercial jet loaded with jet fuel that ran into the side of the headquarters of the Department of Defense. No easy feat, and a colossal sight, and a horrific sight, and a horrific after effect. In a few seconds here, we are approaching 6 p.m. on the East Coast, this day after the attack on the United States of America. And let us look at the stories that are making news at this hour. President Bush, again, at the Pentagon, surveying the damage, thanking all the rescue workers who have worked, many of them around the clock. 800 people is the estimated death toll. Earlier yesterday evening, we were told the death toll casualty count may combined make up 800. It appears that 800 may be dead in all inside. Attorney General John Ashcroft and White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer are confirming an earlier NBC News report that for a time yesterday, the White House was a target, and Air Force One, the flying White House, was a target as well. This explains several things. It explains a rapid takeoff out of Florida, a rapid rise to 45,000 feet by Air Force One, a zigzag pattern to the Air Force Base in Louisiana, a quick trip to an Air Force Base in Omaha before finally returning to the White House in Washington. Another survivor has been found a few hours ago in the rubble of the World Trade Center towers in New York. 7 people have now been rescued. They know of other living people in the debris and rubble. Getting to them is another matter entirely. Thousands are feared dead. There is another feared collapse on the way. A building is groaning and creaking and losing windows. We have had a collapse in the last several hours of a 7-story section of what remained of World Trade Center South. There is also late word, as we continue to cover this disruption that this is causing these United States, that the New York Stock Exchange will not open until at least Friday. We've been saying that professional sports, baseball, again, will not be played today. Certain sports are trying to make up their minds as to whether or not to play this weekend, among them the NFL, NASCAR, college football has been dealing with this today. Boxing, other collegiate sports, golf, all the PGA events have been canceled for this weekend. Absolutely extraordinary effect across the country on organized games. The Olympic officials, Salt Lake City, were quoted today as saying, of course, the Winter Olympic Games will go on. There may be a need for an increase, sadly, in the security budget there. However, I think it's safe to say from our vantage point and knowing what we do that security will probably set a record at these Winter Olympic Games. You're looking at the cloud over Lower Manhattan. That's the American Express building there on the right in the foreground. The Woolworth building suddenly looms large over Lower Manhattan in a way it hasn't done for decades. The sight of it last night when we got off the air with the Empire State Building, again, king of the New York skyline, the tallest building visible for miles in the New York area, where it was once dwarfed by the World Trade Center. Absolutely striking. Where do you want to begin on the after effects of what the terrorist attack has done to the city of New York? And then there's Washington. John Palmer still with us at the Pentagon. John?
Yes, Brian, you know, a little while ago we were talking about the signs, and of course we had the American flag just unfurled on the top of the area that was burned, one of the areas that was burned here on the west side of the Pentagon. About 3 hours ago, a woman came with an American flag, a large American flag on a staff, and she just stood motionless over here on the hill for maybe an hour, just with the flag, kind of making her statement. And last night, as I was going home around 2 o'clock in the morning, I saw a number of signs outside churches that it had special prayer services and so forth. That combined with the shock of driving through fashionable Georgetown in Washington and seeing military MVs, the Humvee, at practically every intersection there in Georgetown. So it's a city that you know very well. It's a city that's been very much affected, as you can imagine, during the past 2 days, very much affected indeed. As far as the president is concerned, the word we have is that the president is still here. We have not seen him, but he indeed, we are told, is here. He is inside saying thank you to the rescue workers and so forth, giving them a pat on the back. Whether or not he will come to this more visible west side area and view personally the damage, we just don't know. But they have unfurled the American flag here, and we would think perhaps that was with the idea that he would see it. The American flag next to all that destruction, still flying in the breeze there from the roof of the building.
John, so we don't know when if we don't know when the motorcade entered, we just won't know when it's vacating until we're told by the press pool inside, I guess. Right.
We would expect certainly when the motorcade leaves, the press pooler normally will give a call out to the television network saying the motorcade now is leaving, heading back to the White House. We have not had that call yet. That makes us presume that he is still inside, but we're constantly checking, trying to find out where he is in that building. As you know, it covers many, many acres, and there are many sides to this building, and he's just not, at least on this side, that we can see at this point.
Let's take a moment here and go back over something that happened yesterday. For a long time yesterday, the president was either in his aircraft, destination undisclosed, or, as the news media were told, in a bunker, a secured underground air command bunker out at an Air Force base in Omaha, Nebraska. It was a little bit, to some, disconcerting. While the administration was represented in the form of a briefing by Karen Hughes in Washington, we saw none of the elected officials. We did not see the vice president. We did not see the president. This is what was going on yesterday, by the way, as the president flew in the United States of America from Nebraska to Washington, D.C. He did so with fighter escort. That was an F-16 you saw off the left wing of Air Force One. This is the view off the right wing. This was shot back in the press cabin, which is on the right side of the aircraft looking forward. In the rear of the aircraft, USAF are the 4 letters visible on the wing, and on those wings also is a device on each wing to confuse heat-seeking missiles. It meant to deploy metal chaff. But that's an F-16 right there, and that was the escort home yesterday for the president's plane. And there was a meeting on Capitol Hill that Newsweek's Howard Feynman reported on during our broadcast last night. I'm going to quote in part from what Howard said. It wasn't clear the president was coming back alone or that he was going to speak to the nation. My sources tell me, this is Howard last night, that it was an angry, even tumultuous meeting on the Hill last evening, sometimes saying the country needs to hear from the president. Howard went on to say, big and small, everyone I talk to, politicians are saying the same thing. The #1 priority for the president is to show himself and show himself in command, in control, in the White House, to reassure the nation that, of course, the president knows what to do. He is the visible leader of the country. Well, the White House made it known today, and NBC News broadcast the story that the reason the president was where he was a verifiable threat, not only against that building right there, the People's House, the White House, but against the aircraft he was traveling in, which is without offensive weaponry. It explains a zigzag flight pattern to the Air Force Base in Louisiana. It explains a lot, knowing this in hindsight. And finally, the quote, as told us by a senior administration official, the president said he wasn't going to let a, quote, tin horn terrorist keep the president of the United States out of Washington. As we mentioned, Lester Holt is in Lower Manhattan with us by telephone. Lester, I understand we've reestablished contact with you.
Reestablished contact, and I have actually even moved closer, Brian. I am at what everyone is referring to as Ground Zero. I am at the base of the World Trade Center. I'm looking at flames now coming up off the top, and there is a skeleton left of this building. It is part of the west and south walls, just the framework that is leaning precariously, and there is concern it's about to come down. We've been moved back. I'm standing amid just hundreds of iron workers who were working here for a time. Fire department just made an announcement with a bullhorn. They said, look, guys, we need to go in and we're going to assess before we let you get back to work. They have heard some groaning and some creaking, and I'm speaking of the mechanical metal kind that gives them great concern about what is left of this building. And you just can't believe the number of workers here, primarily iron workers here, who are going to have to move some of these huge, huge pieces of metal. As I stare here and I look at this, and I could toss a stone into the rubble right now. It stands in some spots 6, 7 stories high of just steel and steel and steel, and to think that there are people beneath that it's actually beyond comprehension. You can't even dwell on it for more than a moment. But it is going to be such a painstaking effort that they've got big. I'm looking right now. There's big cranes in here that are going to be used to lift some of the bigger sections. We think search and rescue, but with the number of iron workers here, it looks like it's going to be just the removal, of the pieces of metal is going to take some time. But as I said, we're still seeing smoke. I'm also, Brian, getting an appreciation for the buildings around that were damaged, the blown out windows. There's another, I don't know, 50, 60-story building here just to the south of South Tower. That's got a gaping hole just right in the middle of it. We don't know what danger it may be in, but it's a building that is going to be out of commission for a very, very long time. I'm looking around at these dust-covered people here to do a job. Some workers have written messages in the dust. Bush, what are you going to do about it? Welcome to hell. Some that I can't even share with you, but that express the frustration, the anger, just the disbelief at what these people, whoever they are, city, Brian.
Lester Holt, thank you for that. We also want to go a few feet away from where Lester is to Ashley Banfield, a short distance away, I should say, also downtown with more. Ashley?
We're being told at this point, Brian, that there's an 8-block radius around One Liberty Plaza that's now been evacuated, and One Liberty Plaza was the building again behind this great big tall black building that's within our camera site. Paul DiGiorgio is we're working with New York Transit, and he's been helping to do some of the construction. You were working at One Liberty Plaza, that area?
Yes.
And what happened when you got this evacuation call? Describe it for me.
We were clearing out the steel, and the fire department says everybody clear the area. We think that that building is going to fall, so they're clearing out the area.
And then when you say clear the area, that's not how they said it, was it?
No, no.
Describe for me what happened.
Everybody panicked and started running because they felt I think maybe somebody heard a twist. Somebody heard something, and then they told everybody to clear out.
And did you just leave all your shovels and equipment where they fell?
Yes, yes.
Was it pandemonium trying to run northward?
People were just running very quickly away, and a couple people fell, but people were just evacuating quickly as fast as possible without getting hurt.
These are all response teams and emergency workers and people like you, right?
Yes.
There were no civilians in that area.
Yes.
No residents.
No residents.
Everybody had been cleared out. There's just It was just civilian. It was just emergency workers. At which point did they tell you that that tall Millennium building is actually twisted and buckling?
As we were working about 40 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago.
And the building behind it, One Liberty Plaza, did you say that all of the windows are blown out of it?
Windows broken everywhere. All over the surrounding buildings, the windows are broken. Doors are broken.
What have you been told about this evacuation route? What will we be seeing? Is this evacuation likely to be carrying on for hours or minutes, or how long will it take to get people out?
Everybody who's working in the area has to clear out of there because of that building is now in danger of collapsing.
This involving police officers, any crew, Con Ed, all of the...
all city agencies.
All city agencies. All right, thanks very much. It's Paul DeGiorgio. He works for the New York Transit. Again, there has been an 8-block radius right around the Liberty Plaza area, Brian, that we've been told by one of the New York police officers that's manning this evacuation route has been evacuated of all emergency response teams and emergency personnel.
All right, Ashley, thank you. John Palmer at the Pentagon. What's going on?
Yes, Brian, we just saw the tail end of the president's motorcade. He indeed did come to this side. We could just see the tops of the couple of the vehicles in the motorcade as he pulled away. So he indeed was on this side. There are just so many emergency vehicles and trucks and what have you in front, and cranes, that we just could not see it when he pulled up. But as we could see, as he went down at the corner, we could see the motorcade. They left about 5 or 6 minutes ago, and so I would expect, as you know, as soon as they get back to the White House, they will be feeding the pool tape, which will show us the close-ups of the president meeting the rescue workers, show his motorcade arriving, and the whole ball of wax. Just couldn't see it from this vantage point.
All right, the camera crews, yes, travel with the president by motorcade. It's called a hand carry back. There are tape decks in the press room at the White House, and as soon as they get back to the building, they will feed that back to us. We will in turn put it on the air and show everyone what the president did while inside the White House. A few notes about the World Trade Center, again, for those who might have not been able to catch up with the story during the day. One estimate out there today is there were between 10 and 20,000 people in the World Trade Center at the time of this attack. A building so large, by the way, that we keep repeating these two stats because they're so stunning. A, it has its own zip code, and B, there are more telephone exchanges inside the World Trade Center than there are in the city of Detroit, Michigan. Home by day, 50,000 people who work there in and around the place, and thousands more who may be visiting. And by the way, people who were exiting the tower not hit by the first aircraft. The other tower, the untouched tower, in the few minutes between aircraft impacts, were telling people that there was an announcement made while they were in the stairwells. The all clear has been sounded. You are free to go back to your desks. A lot of workers, especially those unlucky few who had survived '93, the first time they tried to take this building down, knew what was best, kept going in that stairwell, walked clear of that building right before impact. But presumably a lot of unlucky people heeded the advice of the announcement and went back to their offices and back to work, and some of them went back to certain death upon impact. We are joined by Joe Cantamesa, who's been faithfully and very patiently watching our coverage here, as he did all day yesterday. Joe, as a veteran special FBI agent, was involved in the investigation in TWA 800 World Trade Center the first time around. Joe, I want to back up a little bit and talk about the airplane flight that crashed in Pennsylvania. And the theory that it was headed back, and if you look at the route map, it sure looks like it was headed back to Washington. It sure looks like perhaps they were thinking about taking out a national monument like the Capitol or the White House, God forbid. And we now know anecdotally from cell phone calls that there was kind of a straw poll of some of the, I've heard only some of the male members of the cockpit, I mean the passengers on board, to try to take over the hijackers. Maybe there was a struggle. And maybe that the plane went down in Pennsylvania meant that it wasn't going to go down in Washington. What do you think?
We speculated on exactly that topic midday yesterday, that something was put in the way of the terrorist plan, and we did not know, of course, if it was the pilot or if it was part of the crew members, or in fact, as we seem to find out now, that it was probably the passengers. And thank you to them.
This is an amazing story in the Washington Post that I've just been handed. This story is being posted on the Washington Post website this afternoon for tomorrow morning's edition. And it describes one vignette, one story from on board that flight. A man named Jeremy Glick, anticipating his own death. Jeremy Glick, who celebrated his 31st birthday September 3rd, told his wife that he hoped she would have a good life and would take care of their new 3-month-old baby girl. Glick explained to his wife that the plane had been taken over by 3 Middle Eastern men wearing red headbands, the terrorists wielding knives and brandishing a red box they claimed contained a bomb, ordered the passengers, pilots, and flight attendants toward the rear of the plane, then took over the cockpit. Joe, this is almost more than you can take to hear this kind of story.
This is definitely heavy stuff. You know, heroism shows itself in a lot of different forms. I guess we should be glad and thankful that some of the passengers, and in fact Jeremy, took the opportunity when they had it to make some effort to change the course of their ultimate fate.
And isn't it interesting, Joe, that there's so much a mindset for the common good, especially among commercial airline pilots. Every commercial airline pilot yesterday who saw this videotape said almost in unison, you know what, there's no way that was a commercial airline pilot at the controls flying into the World Trade Center. They would go anywhere else. They would do anything else but take lives and property on their way in. They would fly that thing anywhere else. And that's what led investigators to theorize early on that these hijackers used their own pilots.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of working with several professional pilots during my career, and protecting, of course, their passengers and crew is number one. But if things go wrong, particularly with helicopter pilots, get it on the ground, but avoid causing any trouble on the ground. And this was, of course, at a proportion no one would have ever imagined.
We're also joined by a veteran guest of ours, familiar face to longtime viewers, Ken Allard, a veteran of the intelligence and military communities, and I'm hearing we just lost Ken Allard's feed from Washington, and I so badly wanted to ask him a question about this. Joe, will continue. Instead of this being a three-way conversation, it'll remain at 2. You feel a special tie to the first World Trade Center investigation. You were there. For people who were not around, forget the particulars, how botched a mission was that compared to what could have happened that day had they, God forbid, been successful in their mission?
Well, the first bombing, the plan was to take down the tower. What I don't believe they realized was, although they had a significant bomb, the structure of the building, particularly at the foundation level, was so significant that they barely even scratched or dented it. Most of the damage from that first incident really came from a similar effect of blowing out a floor and having the floors load and causing a collapse, which incidentally is pretty much underneath the mezzanine area of what is Building 3, or the hotel that's about to come down or has come down.
Joe, thanks. We just got word from the what's called the pool report. The press pools are a modern invention because the press corps covering the president got so unwieldy, so large. A few representatives from each organization are designated in a revolving basis every day. So the press pool covering the president today reports the following. President Bush stood and met at the Pentagon with Rumsfeld, said he was overwhelmed by the devastation and the destruction. He thanked the workers at the Pentagon and around the country. He thanked those who have given their blood and their prayers since the attack. And he said he was angry to be at the Pentagon. He said the U.S. cannot be cowed by terrorists, by people who don't share American values. He said, though the nation mourns today, the nation will, of course, go on. It's a great nation. He thanked the workers, took no questions, by the way, from the media, shook hands with hundreds of rescue workers and military personnel, we're told. A dozen rescue workers who we saw unfurled that flag. They sang God Bless America for the president. The president looked at the damage with his hands in his pockets. Here is that rather dramatic scene at the Pentagon. Ken Allard, our military analyst, here we are in a situation where the U.S. has never needed the intelligence community so badly, that is to find out who's behind this, and the intelligence community has never been under more fire for such a big miss.
Brian, that is exactly the challenge, simply because of the fact that, you know, it's a very, very tough thing to try and figure out what went wrong at the very same time that you're trying to get right the things that you're going to have to do. Basically, if for no other reason than the fact that I'm sure that what's going on right now, what I expect is going on right now, is the matching of military plans and capabilities to those intelligence reports, to those intelligence analyses. So you're exactly right. They simply can't afford to stand still. They've got no choice but to keep moving forward.
Ken, just a quick point here. We're waiting for when the motorcade arrives back at the White House. They slam the videotape into the machine and feed it out to all of us. What we've decided to do in this case, instead of holding it, turning it around and editing it, we're going to put it fresh right onto the air. So as soon as we see that come up, we're going to deliver it to you. So those will be the pictures we'll be seeing, and we don't see it as yet. I see the motorcade in a holding pattern right here, but it's not moving video. Ken, what do you do to prevent jumping the gun? And we asked this earlier of Judge Webster. In a nation where the anger quotient, the thirst for retribution right now is so high.
Well, you know, you remember that the elder President Bush took 7 months to get ready before he launched Desert Storm. And that simply is something that has to be managed in terms of expectations. That's really easy for us to say on TV. It's a real tough thing for any leader to do. But that, unfortunately, is going to be one of the tests of George Bush's leadership right now. The extent to which he can project that authority, explain to the American people what he's doing, and the fact that he's going to take his time. As they say, revenge is a dish best eaten cold, and he's going to have to really show that.
What did you learn from Trent Lott's comments today, who said that the counterattack, I think he used the word unusual?
Yeah, I was a little surprised by some of Senator Lott's comments because you remember also, Brian, that he made the comment that we were at war whether it was declared or not. I'm not really sure that you know, that was terribly helpful, given the fact that, again, it is Congress's responsibility to declare war. And obviously, he's one of the leading members of that body, so I hope that we can get some more clarification on that point from him later.
And what would unusual constitute?
It's very, very difficult to say right now. Again, that word thrown out there by itself really doesn't tell us very much.
Ken, this talk of a coalition is reminiscent, of course, of the Persian Gulf War, the Balkans. How does a coalition add together to make a counterstrike?
Well, you know, Brian, it's not only reminiscent of the Gulf War, it's also reminiscent of World War II. Again, the aftermath of that last Pearl Harbor. The thing that you've got to have, particularly given the fact that we are likely to be operating in the Middle East, you've almost got to restore that Persian Gulf coalition that was so terribly effective when the elder George Bush put it together. It's very tough to go and do anything in that part of the world without bases and without allies, and we're going to need both. So it's very, very clear that when Secretary Powell talks about the need to have allies in that region, particularly Muslim states, he really is making some very, very perceptive comments.
Okay, Ken, let me let people in on what's going on. Why don't we show you all we have so far? This is the shot of frozen piece of videotape, and that is the top of the van where the one van in the motorcade has a sunroof, out of which the television camera pool photographer shoots the moving video of the moving Bush motorcade. That's all we have so far is that picture. This will soon become rolling videotape. It'll happen in less than 2 minutes' time. And while this rolls, while we will be sending it out to people live, I will step away. NBC's John Siegenthaler will take over as we continue to go back and forth all evening long in our live and uninterrupted NBC News coverage on the NBC television network and on MSNBC. Ken Allard, we are talking about, we're just being told that we're 1 minute away from seeing the president's outing at the Pentagon. Ken, in the past we have relied on things like cruise missiles because the basis of warfare has changed. Secretary Rumsfeld today said there's a new battlefield around the world in this year 2001. And I guess the kind of retribution, we're jumping to conclusions here, would involve that kind of technology.
Well, it'll certainly involve that kind of technology, Brian. But you know, I think one of the things that has come to a sudden halt here is any more talk about cutting the military, because you're going to need every last man and woman in uniform that you can have. I particularly am fond of talking about the contribution that ground forces make, and I think that, quite frankly, there's a potential role for ground forces at the low-tech end of things when it comes to this kind of retribution.
Okay, Ken, this is and this runs, we're told, 28 minutes. We're giving it to our viewers in its raw form. There ahead is the motorcade. This always is shaky. It's a tough task for the shooters of the videotape on top of that van. Here is President's motorcade coming along the front of the Pentagon where the damage is. Again, we're seeing this as it happens, so the television crew getting out. President's vehicle is about 8 vehicles ahead. There's his limousine, usually a decoy, 1 or 2 loaded Chevy Suburban type vehicles, a van called Wire One for the news wires, and then television correspondents and staff and backup the president's physician. There's the president shaking hands with some of the soldiers. There's an impromptu kind of bivouac area that sprung up on the lawn last night after the bombing. Some police officers, members of the military. So we're coming up here on the half hour. We're going to let this play. Again, John Siegenthaler will be with you 6:30 Eastern on as we watch George W. Bush thanking those people who have really been up all night in the rescue effort and will do so in the days to come. NBC News live coverage continues.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Siegenthaler, NBC News, and you are watching pictures of the President of the United States as he visits the Pentagon and says hello to those who are at the Pentagon outside, greeting him today following the attack on the Pentagon yesterday. As Brian Williams just mentioned a little while ago, this is videotape playback of the President's visit, and we are watching it along with you. Obviously a crowd outside to say hello to the President, and a large American flag draped over the part of the Pentagon which was hit by the airliner yesterday. NBC's John Palmer, I believe, is standing by the Pentagon. John, are you still there?
Yes, I am, John.
And I know that you can't see this videotape, and you were not close enough to actually see the President, but did we get some sense from the Pentagon why the President decided at this point to make this visit?
Well, we certainly did from the White House. Officials there said the president very much wanted to come over. He wanted to wait until his presence here would not cause any problems because of the massive rescue effort that is going on. Sadly, though, there's not much to interfere with here as far as the rescue effort goes. There has been no sign of life. There have been dogs, sniffing dogs over there. We have had listening devices which have been placed around. There has been no sign of life in the rebel, the debris there since yesterday, just before noontime. We got a briefing just a few minutes ago from the chief of the Fairfax, Virginia Fire and Rescue Team. That's the team that has a lot of experience. This is their third terrorist event. They were at Oklahoma City. They were in Nigeria for the bombing there of the embassy. And now here they are at the bombing of the Pentagon in the United States. They've also covered about 5 earthquakes. At any rate, they say now the searchers are in there, the dogs are in there, they're continuing their searches, although they can't be very hopeful at this particular point. There are 3 aspects of the work here. One was certainly to put out the fire, and that has been done. The others is to search for survivors, and they're continuing to do that. And the third is the FBI investigation. This is a crime scene. And the FBI agents were fanning out today, going over every inch of the square mile on this side of the Pentagon, looking for any debris from the aircraft, anything that might have fallen from the plane.
Let me just interrupt you a second, because we were watching there for a moment the workers on top of the Pentagon holding the huge American flag. Can you see that American flag from where you are?
Yes, we can zoom in on that American flag right here. It is. It was unfurled, maybe about 15 minutes before the president arrived. It's about, as you can see, 3 stories high or so. And some military men came out on the roof there. Incidentally, just 24 hours ago, there were firemen all over that roof as they were fighting the blaze. The blaze moved way along the top here, along the roof. That's a wooden roof, but it has a shingle top to it. But the support is all wooden, and the fire seems to have traveled quite a distance along there. It's been a very stubborn fire. It was not put out until about noon today. Officials had hoped to have it out by dawn today.
I want to also bring in NBC's Bob Kerr at the White House. Bob, are you there?
Yes, and I'm watching with you, John.
I know, and Ari Fleischer was asked earlier today about the president's mood, so to speak, or you know, and he talked some about standing shoulder to shoulder with Congress, standing firm on this. But do we get any more sense of the president's feeling and why this was an important trip for him to make today?
Well, you know, it's the first trip away from the White House since he got back yesterday on a very, very tense day. And he went over to the Pentagon by motorcade, which is also of some note. You were talking before. I heard John Palmer say that the White House was saying that this was important, and yes, Ari Fleischer has been saying now for a day and a half that the president thinks it is important, wants to visit not only this site here near the White House, but also wants to get out and be elsewhere. I guess that means New York City, where people need comfort. The president wants to do that sort of thing, but he does not want to intrude, certainly on a scene that is ongoing in terms of an investigation and clearing debris and that sort of thing. But in coming days, we fully expect him to get out.
Well, here he is out, and he's taking pictures with some of these rescue workers who have worked so hard over the last 24 hours trying to save lives at the Pentagon, although as John Palmer has been reporting, it's a very grim sight there now. John, we have talked a great deal about totals, and unfortunately at the Pentagon it appears, as you said earlier, how many do you believe they believe were killed in this blast, and there's no they don't believe there's any chance that anyone has still survived?
No, they don't. They honestly don't believe anybody has survived. But the good news is, and there is some good news, yesterday they were talking about perhaps as many as 800 may have died. That's including the military and civilian personnel in this section of the west part of the Pentagon, including the 63 people aboard the American American Airlines 757. Now they're saying they're looking at a range of 150 to 200 fatalities. So that's quite different. They can't actually do a count to see who was there, because there were construction workers moving in and out who might have been in that part of the building, who might not have been in that part of the building. They're military. They can, of course, track down the military pretty easily to see who's missing. But they say this area, one part of the area that was badly burned right near the impact site, was under renovation. So they had the first couple of floors were vacant, but the upper floors people were working, and some people were starting the renovation process. So they're not quite sure. They can't get a firm hold on it, and they are very reluctant to give any numbers count. We did get from the fire department officials as high as 800 yesterday. It seemed a little high. That's what they were saying. And today they're scaling it to about 200. That's a ballpark figure still, but it's a heck of a lot better ballpark than the 800.
Bob Kerr, as we look at these pictures outside, there was Condoleezza Rice. As we look at some of these pictures, talk to me about the information that we got today, which the White House confirmed the story that the White House and Air Force One were targets of this terrorist attack. We didn't get any specific information, though, about how Air Force One was a target of the attack, did we?
Well, no, we didn't, John, and we also really didn't get any information about how the White House and other agencies came to know that they were a target. They don't want to reveal, as they almost never do, the sources of the information they get for fear of compromising the way they listen in to people or find out what people are planning or thinking. But it is an interesting connection you raise with President Bush's visit over to the Pentagon, and we've certainly given it a lot of thought today over here at the White House. What the White House is saying is that the plane that took off from Dulles, this 757, the hijacked one that slammed into the Pentagon, actually had as its intended target...
As the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, standing with the President. Go ahead.
Well, actually had as its intended target the White House. Both Ari Fleischer here at the White House and Department of Justice Secretary Ashcroft said there is real and reasonable and credible evidence to that effect. But you're right, John, they have not gone into, at least publicly, the sources of that.
Well, the reason I ask it is because you could imagine, anyway, just from what we've heard, that there could be planes, you know, that the aircraft could target the White House. But one of the security experts, the terrorism experts we talked to, said this raised the question of whether there were ground-to-air missiles that the Secret Service might have been concerned about.
Well, Air Force One is said to be a very, very secure aircraft, and yesterday you could see, in fact, the fighter planes on each wing acting as an escort, and they take other measures, less visible ones, almost all the time with the President. So yeah, there are some questions about why they were so concerned about Air Force One, but you know, this all came about, John, because there was some you know, sort of criticism in Washington. There was an article even by conservative William Bennett today, a comment by him saying that the President should have gotten back to Washington right away, shouldn't have been shuttling around and being kept in hiding, so to speak. But that's a tough call for an outsider to make. We were told all day yesterday, John, that the President did want to come back to the White House as soon as possible. Not all day, but by the afternoon, by the late afternoon, we were told that the President wanted to come back and that, yeah, there was some tension between the Secret Service and the President and his aides over this, but that's not unusual. The Secret Service often is much more restrictive than a president wants to be.
The other point the other thing we should point out, I think, is that during the time of this attack, there was so much we didn't know. There were still some airplanes in the air, supposedly reports of airplanes in the air that had not been grounded, had not landed, had not been diverted when the President was making his way across the country. And so I'm assuming, as the President getting some applause there from the crowd, but I'm assuming that that did play into the Secret Service decision.
Absolutely. And there have been some questions raised this afternoon about the timing. You know, which leg of the president's flight was it when all the aircraft have been removed from the sky, and the ones we knew about that had done their evil deeds had already hit the ground or hit buildings. There was some question about the timing there, but I think that, you know, in this case, one would be tempted to give the benefit of the doubt to security.
Let me mention one other bit of information while we're watching this videotape. One Liberty Plaza, which is a 54-story black glass building across Broadway in New York City, across from the World Trade Center, is reportedly on the verge of collapse, and we are going to be following that part of the story. That's on the right-hand side of your screen there. We've been watching this very carefully in New York. We want you to know that we are still monitoring the situation. It has meant a larger perimeter in Lower Manhattan and more headaches for police, firefighters, and emergency workers and construction workers down there who are trying to really get this whole part of Lower Manhattan back into shape. It's going to be a long time, but this is not going to make it any easier, and this is going to be very difficult.
John?
Yes, go ahead.
We were told, I was told just before I came out here to speak with you, that the president did make some remarks here on his Pentagon tour. I don't know when they come up, but the visit itself wasn't all that long, so we are on raw tape here, and it could come up at any time.
We'll be watching for that in just a second. Tell me, what do we know what the president has on his agenda for the next 24 hours? Any idea?
Well, I think, well, one thing we do know is that the president, according to his aides here, will be and intends to be absolutely focused on the aftermath of this tragedy for the next short while at least. They are going to make changes in what was to be a heavy schedule of travel, promoting other sorts of issues and initiatives. That's all gone by the boards, at least for the next short while. The president intends to remain completely focused on this. And John, I would say today 1, 2, probably 3 at least meetings with his national security team, not to mention any that might have gone on by phone or teleconference.
We are watching videotape of the President of the United States at his visit to the terrorist attack site at the Pentagon. You saw just a little while ago National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, the Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, and John Palmer. Talk to me for a moment, if you would, about the security around, and we may need to interrupt in just a second if the president makes remarks. Actually, he's going to. Let's listen first.
First of all, I must tell you, I am overwhelmed by the devastation. I am so grateful for the people who are working here. We're here to say thanks to not only the workers on this site, but the workers who are doing the same work in New York City. I want to say thanks to the folks who have given blood to the Red Cross. I want to say thanks for the hundreds and thousands of Americans who pray for the victims and their families. Secretary Rumsfeld told me when I talked to him that he felt the blast shake the Pentagon. Even though he was on the other side of the building rocked. And now I know why. Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry. And our country will, however, not be cowed by terrorists, by people who don't share the same values we share, by people who are willing to destroy people's lives because we embrace freedom. Our nation mourns, but our government will go on. Our country will function. We're on high alert for any possible activity. But coming here confirms what the Secretary and I both know, that this is a great nation. The people here working hard prove it. People out here working their hearts out to answer families' questions, to remove the rubble and debris from this awful scene. And again, thank everybody, not only in this site, but all across America, who are responding so generously and so kindly in their prayers, and their contributions of blood, and their willingness to help in any way they can.
We can go this way.
Okay.
The remarks from the President of the United States at the Pentagon, and John Palmer at the Pentagon. I was just going to ask a little bit about the security around that building itself. Clearly, there's heightened security there, but the Pentagon is sort of in the middle of several very busy roads in Washington, D.C., highways in Washington, D.C. What goes on around there right now? Is some of that traffic blocked off or not?
Yes, some of the traffic is blocked off around here, and the security has been quite tight. There were flyovers of F-16s this afternoon. Again, as the President's, the time of his arrival approached, security got much tighter. You know, I was talking about the President. I would think that I can imagine nothing else that is more defining of his presidency than how he handles the situation, as much as Franklin Roosevelt at the time of Pearl Harbor. There's the economy. There are a lot of other
John,
issues,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to listen to this. The President is actually speaking to some of the people who've been working so hard. Let's listen. I'm sorry.
Grab your arm. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming. Thank you. How are you? Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here. Thank you, sir. Thanks for being here. Thanks. Thank you, sir. Glad you're here.
This is a defining moment of his presidency, the most difficult time any president's had in many, many years, and how he handles the situation and how the country responds to him is going to be crucial in the next several days, as you were saying.
Yes, I can think of no other comparison than Pearl Harbor and Franklin Roosevelt. But then, of course, as has been said many times today, then he knew who the enemy was and had America behind him. Certainly President Bush has America behind him in pursuing this matter. But first you have to really, not only for the satisfaction of security people and the people of this country, but also taking into consideration the rest of the world, pinpoint very clearly who did this with sufficient proof, and then the hard part of trying to carry out and bring the parties to justice who did this. And so then indeed is a very difficult thing.
The other step really is assuring the American people that they are going to be able to feel safe in their own country. I mean, even if you attack those who are responsible and those who may have had something to do with this, the fear of terrorism doesn't necessarily go away. There may be others out there who would carry out terrorist acts. The threat of terrorism is not just in the United States, but it's worldwide. And it's something that this country is going to have to deal with, and this president is now going to have to address in a major way. All right, John Palmer at the Pentagon, thank you very much. Bob Kerr at the White House, thank you very much. I want to take a look downtown in Lower Manhattan. This is where we have a 54-story building. It's called One Liberty Plaza. It's across from the World Trade Center, and reportedly it's near collapse. NBC's Ashley Banfield's been down there throughout all of this. Ashley, what can you tell us?
All right, let's just go up to that shot again and let me describe for you what you're seeing. What may look to some people like one large, flat, black building is two. Those horizontal windows are One Liberty Plaza. That building, apparently on the Broadway side, would be the left side of your screen. On the opposite side that's out of your view, has apparently buckled, and many of the windows are blown out. those smaller windows, that actually represents another building. It's Millennium Tower. Some call it Millennium Hotel. And it's a skinnier building just directly north. It might look like one flat building, but it's two buildings. We're hearing conflicting reports about Millennium Tower, but we are hearing that One Liberty Plaza and One Liberty Tower, that larger horizontal windowed building, is in peril of coming down. We've all been moved to this perimeter now. It's about 2 to 3 blocks up from where we were moved live when I talked to you a couple of times ago. I just want to show you something, Brian. Look what was handed out just a short time ago. This photograph, this flyer, missing One World Trade Center, 100th floor, Roger Mark Rossweiler, with a description and phone numbers. Pretty telling about how family members are feeling right about now and trying to get any information they can. I'd like to actually call in Chaplain Law. Could you just come over here, sir? I wanted to ask you about some of the work that you were doing earlier today. You've been on site. There have been other chaplains as well. What predominantly have you been doing?
We were there to minister to people, give them an opportunity to talk to us. We pray with them, you know, whatever we can. At one time, there was a injured GMT woman, and I was able to console her a little bit before we sent her away in the ambulance.
Have you found yourself talking mostly to fire crews and police officials who have lost comrades and loved ones as well?
It has been a very painful experience. They share with me, especially firefighters. One situation, they lost the whole battalion in there. I guess they were the first crew in, and they were all there.
Chaplain Law, have you or any of the other religious and clergy staff given any last rites?
I did not see any, but I would imagine that when the opportunity presents itself, we will be around to do that.
We had heard that one clergy member did perform the last rites on one body. Had you heard that or seen any evidence?
I did not see it myself, but whatever we can do, this is pretty much a ministry of presence, and we just want to be with people to work together.
All right, Chaplain Law, thank you very much. With New York Corrections, right? Thanks so much for talking to us, and thank you for doing the work that you're doing as well. Good luck. I wanted to tell you also, John, that there is one incredible story that comes from some of these New York City police officers who have been basically keeping the press back, but on occasion have been engaging us with some small anecdotal stories. Some are rumor, some are just talk among the troops, but one story many of them agreed that they'd all heard was that a Port Authority police officer on the 82nd floor of one of the towers, we don't know which one, apparently rode that collapse all the way down, broke several limbs, several bones, but survived, and is now apparently talking to his family members. A lot of the New York City police officers are talking about this success story. Again, a Port Authority police officer on the 82nd floor of one of those towers rode that collapse down, survived it with broken limbs, badly injured, and is apparently now talking to his family members.
Yeah,
Back to you, John.
This is a story we've been hearing about all day long, and it's I'm glad to hear that you've got it confirmed, because it's one of those amazing stories. Ashley Banfield, thank you very much. In the meantime, the question is how these hijackers were able to do what they did, and we're joined now from Venice, Florida by Rudy Deckkers, president and owner of Huffman Aviation. Rudy's school provided pilot training for 2 of the suspected hijackers allegedly involved in yesterday's events. Mr. Deckkers, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Good evening.
What can you tell us about these 2 men?
One second, I got a phone call handed to me here. I can't do 2 things at once.
No, I know, I believe that's our correspondent, Kerry Sanders, who wants to talk to you, but go ahead.
What was the question? Repeat that, sir.
Well, just what can you tell us about these 2 men?
Most of it I learned today from my employees and from looking into information that, of course, I didn't know. We have a couple of hundred students coming in, but these guys, they apparently came in July last year, 2000. They came in with already some training from another flight school in Tampa. They were not happy they left the flight school. They came to Huffman Aviation to do additional flight training to obtain their licenses. We took all the information necessary to call them a student in our company. We also took copies of their passports, and that has been in the file. We heard obvious this morning that the federal agencies were looking for these kind of files. We gave the files to them. We gave all kinds of cooperation on that side. Other than that, they were normal students. They're flying 5 months with us.
How much did you take? How often did you take them up?
Well, I never took them up. I'm just the owner in this place here.
But how often did your company take them up?
In 5 months, every day, a couple of times per day. They obtained more than 250 hours per pilot for the license that they were going for.
Did they have some sort of story about what their plans were?
No, of course not.
No, I don't mean about the plans, the terrorist act, obviously, but did they say anything about what they actually were going to do with their license?
Well, yes, they told my people here, and one of them told me that they came here to get the license to fly back for an airline in their own country, what most students are doing. Now, they could have heard that story from other students in other schools, so they had a story for us ready. When they walked into the door...
Anything unusual about them?
Nothing. Nothing. We have asked ourselves today, was there anything noticeable for us, for my employees, to know anything? We don't know anything what we could have done different to know what the plans were of these animals. They came into the front door. They had already their license to be in the United States. We don't let them in. The government leaves them in here. They had already one license obtained somewhere else, and they conducted the flight training with my flight school here in Venice. And they did, after the training, the tests with the designated examiner from the FAA, and they passed. And after they passed, they are out of my sight.
I mean, did you see them? You saw them, right?
I saw them, yes.
So give us an idea what they look like, how they dressed.
Well, I have seen only one on a regular base once a month. That was the bigger guy. I liked that guy to talk to. I talked to him 2-3 minutes in the hallway. I'm not every day here in this company. I have more flight schools that I handle. I liked the guy, the bigger guy. He was nice to everybody here. He was smiling. He was like every other student. The smaller guy, and as I understand, that was Atta, but I'm not sure because I never knew the names with the guys because I don't know all my students. He was not a nice person. Nobody liked him. He was not socializing. Actually, they were both not socializing at all with the other students. So I didn't like that the other little guy.
Did they speak English well?
Yeah, surprisingly today they asked me that question a few times. They were speaking English very well. They were not just here one day and come for training. Most of our people come from foreign countries. They obtain their visas in their consulates or embassies in their countries, and they come over before, and then they come to us directly. These guys came from another flight school, came in the front door. My student coordinator back then asked for copies of their licenses or IDs, and apparently we were able to make pictures of their passports. And when the FBI came in 2:30 a.m. this morning, and we showed them the files, apparently we had copies of their passports.
So now, you said the little guy you didn't like very much. Give us an idea of what you didn't like about him, other than the fact that he didn't socialize with other students.
Well, I am a very outspoken person, and that is a bad habit sometimes. In this case, I don't feel bad because the guy is a real animal, but if I don't like somebody, I just ignore him, and that was the case. I didn't like him from when I saw him. He had a different feeling of humor with the other guys. They were not socializing at all. We think now that that little guy was kind of the leader of the two. They were always together. When I tell you I talked to them, and it's maybe 10-15 minutes totally in all the months that they've been here.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second. You're watching MSNBC live coverage of Attack on America. Let me continue my conversation with Rudy Deckkers, who's the owner of Huffman Aviation School in Venice, Florida, the school that actually trained two of the apparent hijackers in this terrorist attack. And Mr. Deckkers, we talk about their training, and maybe you can explain to us, there were two planes, a 757 and a 767. Did the training that they received at your school allow them to fly those planes?
Negative. Let me explain to you what kind of licenses they obtained through us. They came in with already a private pilot license. One of them, they obtained a single engine license, a small multi-engine license. And,
from you?
An IFR from us. No, they get the training from us. They don't get the license from us.
I understand.
They do an exam. They do an exam with the FAA, and the FAA issues a license. Now, these licenses are absolutely not capable of the pilots to fly big equipment like this. Absolutely not. After they left in November, my flight school here, and I learned today that I left in November because, again, I don't know all my clients.
Sure.
They went to another flight school where they obtained jet training, where they obtained simulator and or jet training. With my licenses, with the licenses they obtained through my flight school, it is not possible for them to sit in a cockpit and actually steer that plane. I fly 20 years. I never flown in a big jet like that. I don't think I'm capable to do that. Of course, if you know that you're going to kill yourself, you're probably capable to do a lot more. But we did not have anything on instruction from my instructors to these two animals who on jet training. In November they left, they were out of our picture, and apparently we learned today they went to another flight school to do training in bigger equipment.
You must have been watching this whole thing unfold like everybody else on television, I assume. When did it come to your attention that these people might have been involved?
This morning at 7 o'clock, 2:30 a.m. this morning, the FBI talked to my managers and asked my managers to see some files. My manager said, well, why don't you take all the files? We do a lot of foreign training. We like to help you out immediately with all the cooperation. I gave them also a computer that it could be that they access the internet on because some people want to send some email at home to whoever. And we gave them that computer too, to give them all the information. And I did not see any news today because I've been for the camera the whole day. So I don't know what happened today. I only saw yesterday.
After you learned that these people were involved, may have been involved, what was your reaction?
This morning, yesterday, I felt like every other citizen or American. I had goosebumps all over my body. We felt terrible for what happened yesterday. It is still information that you see on the TV. It's still 2,000 miles away. Of course, you're hurt. Everybody felt that. Today, it was at my doorstep. It was not 2,000 miles away. I felt terrible, and I asked myself, was there anything that we could have known or could have done? And I know the whole day, more employees been asking themselves, there's nothing we could have done more than we did already. There's nothing more information that we could have asked. We are all, we're all very depressed what's going on here. Not today, but what's been going on with these guys.
I understand that. And I'm not really asking you that question as much as I am. And I know you have gone through racking your brain all day long trying to give the FBI and investigators any tidbit of information. But the United States of America looks to people like you because you had contact with people to give them some idea of what kind of people we were dealing with. How can you shed any more light on that for us?
Well, again, I'm just the president. It doesn't mean that I'm in contact with all the customers. My job usually is dealing with the managers, and the managers, they deal with the people, and my employees deal with the students. I have overheard today many of my employees checked out what's been happening with these two guys. I know their faces because, as I said, I have spoken with them maybe for 15 minutes. When they walked in here the front door, we didn't know where they came from. We asked them all the information. Apparently one of them came from Afghanistan, the other one I don't know. I never saw the passports, but my people made copies of the passports, give them to the FBI, and but other than that, there was no strange behavior other than that they were not socializing with the people here. We have not been heard. We did not hear from them any comment about the U.S., any comment about the government, or any comment about the system.
Rudy,
all they said that they invest.
Rudy Deckkers, of course, to people who might be just joining us, is the president of Huffman Aviation School in Venice, Florida, which Mr. Deckkers now believes trained two of the people who may have been involved in this attack on the United States. two of the pilots. But as you were saying, if they walked into a room, if they walked into the studio right now, would there be anything that I saw about them that would stand out?
If they would walk into the room right now, I would react like every other citizen American, and that's to squeeze their own neck with my own hands, because these animals don't deserve to be on Earth. And I will do everything what I can to prevent a system that when we get foreign students, that we do a double check. The government is checking them. They came into the United States. They came in through another flight school, apparently, with licenses. I have said this morning on another news channel that I won't let any people in my company anymore from their belief. And I said Muslims, and I was wrong with that because of the fact that there's a lot of good Muslims. But what I mean to say is, when I got somebody coming in my flight schools, and I own more than just this flight school, we will send the information to the FBI, the local office, to double check what's going on. We don't want this. We don't want this. We don't want this. We want the same thing as you guys, safety.
I understand exactly what you're saying. What I really was asking was, you know, hindsight's 20/20. All I'm asking you is something about the way they look, the way they dressed, the way they acted, other than what you said, that makes them stand out in any way. Not that you would have recognized it at the time, just that would give us another clue as to who they are.
I recall the bigger guy more than the smaller guy, obvious for the reason I told you already. The bigger guy was slumpy clothing, The other guy, I didn't pay too much attention on at all. They were not behaving different than the other students. They're nothing. They slept, one of my employees rented out a room to them because usually we got students coming from overseas and we know weeks up front that they're coming, and then we book hotels or space for them to stay. In this case, they walked through the front door and they asked us, we investigated your flight school. We want to abduct training here. And we would like to do business with your school. My people said, we have no space for you to stay. Then I asked my employees, well, is there nobody who has a spare room? Can we rent out a room? I mean, face it, we're a flight school, and we want to train people.
What kind of pilots were? What kind of pilots were they?
I checked with the instructor who dealt with them. They were average pilots, not exceptionally good. The bigger one, the big guy was a little less. The small guy was smarter. That's all I heard from the instructor.
After a day of dealing with this, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, when I heard about it this morning, 7 o'clock, I can't describe you my feeling. I'm asking myself constant, and reporters too, would there be anything with the knowledge now what they did that I would see, recognizing for the problem they did? No, nothing. I don't think that my people who dealt with them, not me, but my people, could have done anything to prevent this. They came in here, they did the license, they left, they went to another flight school to get jet training, because it is absolutely impossible to go in a jet from our school. We do not train jets, we're not qualified, we don't even have them. They fly only the small stuff. So I feel bad, my people feel bad, and much worse than yesterday. But could we change anything on this? Nothing. 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 We feel bad.
Rudy Deckkers, we appreciate the time that you've taken to talk to us today and to shed a little light on a very difficult topic, I know, for you and for the rest of the country. Again, thank you for your time. Rudy Deckkers, the president of the aviation school, Huffman Aviation School in Venice, Florida. The school that we now believe was the school that trained two of the terrorists involved in the bombing on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Commercial airline pilots are trained to handle a host of emergency situations in the air, but what are they specifically told about dealing with terrorists? That's one of the questions we want to ask our next guest, who is in Scottsdale, Arizona, Jim Tillman, who spent 23 years flying jets for American Airlines. Jim, thanks for being with us again.
Yes, it's okay, no problem.
Let me just ask you about what you've heard. It sounds as if these students at the Huffman School went to one school, then to another school, and then to a third school before they were able to fly or attempt to fly a 757, 767. Give us the process that would have happened, that they would have to go through to achieve that expertise.
Well, first of all, they obviously had a private pilot's license of some kind that they'd gotten from their initial training, which would not take very long or many hours to achieve. Then they went to another school to get their multi-engine license and to get their instrument tickets, which was probably a prerequisite for that jet training. Then they went to the jet training school to get qualified to fly a jet airplane.
Mr. Deckkers suggested that, as far as he was concerned, that he wanted to make sure that any other students that come through his office need to be checked more carefully. Is that possible?
I don't know how much we can do with that. I mean, I don't know that we're ever going to want to shut the door on training pilots from other nations. And it's very, very difficult to determine what the person's ultimate goal would be. You know, they can tell you anything, and they can create whatever credentials that would be adequate. I feel very, very sorry for Mr. Deckkers and his staff, because I don't know at this moment what else they could have done under the circumstances, except that now we're in a different world, and our standards and our policies and our procedures are changing as we speak. And I don't know what they'll do differently, but I think for sure they'll do something.
I mean, with a car or a truck, as we've seen before, terrorists can do damage as well. But with an airplane, there is more flexibility in some sick sense. And I guess that question goes for almost every aspect of our lives, but because this was, these were pilots or people who were training to be pilots, that's why I asked the question about their background, especially on people who would be trained to handle very large aircraft.
Well, foreign nations buy aircraft from the United States. Foreign nations and foreign individuals, for that matter, could buy a 757 or a 767 if they had enough money. And of course, once you buy the airplane, it's obvious that you're going to need to get the training to fly it, and you can send your crews to the United States to get them trained to fly that aircraft. It's something that happens all the time. I've been in flight academies with foreign students, many foreign students from other countries, that were attending the same schools that I have been attending.
How tough is it to fly one of those big jets?
Well, it depends on what they're going to do with it. My feeling about that is if it's a single mission operation, it's probably not terribly tough to do. That is to say, if the only thing they really wanted to be able to accomplish was to be able to navigate their flight to a certain point, New York or Washington, and to fly it into a building, if that's really what their single objective was, it wouldn't be terribly tough to develop those skills if you had the equipment and the time and the kind of instruction that would be necessary to do that.
It seems to me, I mean, how fast do we think that the jets flying into the World Trade Center, they just appeared from the videotape to be flying at very high speeds. How difficult, it would seem just to the layman that would be a very difficult process, not something that even a trained pilot would easily do.
It's not something a trained pilot would easily do, but then again, we don't practice doing just that. And the other part of it is, I don't really believe they were going that fast when they hit the trade building.
Really?
I think that they were probably closer to their maneuvering speeds around the 200 to 210 and 220 knot range, because at that speed you have time to make minor adjustments, and you can have an ease of controlling the airplanes. Those two types of airplanes, the 7.5 and 7.6, are like very docile, and they're really not so hard to control in the air. But it's not exactly like anybody can do it, but with a little bit of training and experience and a little practice, you can certainly do it at relatively low air speeds.
One other story that we've been talking about a great deal, and it has to do with flight, the flight that crashed just outside of Pittsburgh, and a man named Jeremy Glick, 31-year-old, who called his wife, Lizbeth, to tell her he loved her and to wish her a good life and to take care of their baby, that he was going to do something to try to stop the hijackers along with other people on that aircraft. When you're talking about a hijack situation, what do pilots train for as far as trying to prevent it? What does the crew train for?
We're trained very little because hijacking always until yesterday usually ended in landing someplace safely. It rarely ended in any other kind of way. So what you're trained to do is to fly the airplane safely no matter what, and to follow the instructions of the hijacker, because you're better off keeping that person calm and relaxed as much as you can than to have them go berserk in the cockpit. So if they want to go to Kennedy Airport, then you say, fine, let's go to Kennedy. So you go to Kennedy Airport if possible to do that. So we don't have any training in doing battle with somebody in the cockpit or in the cabin either, for that matter. We depend on the system to protect us, to not allow that sort of thing to ever get on our airplane.
You mean the security at the airport?
Absolutely.
So should we still depend on that? Should we focus just on the security at the airport, or is there something that ought to be done in the air as well?
I don't think anything is ever going to be feasible or practical to do in the air. We're just not equipped. The airplanes aren't designed that way, and the crews should not be asked to do that. I believe that our system can be beefed up. I think we can begin to select and train and supervise a better cadre of people. I think the weakest link we have is a human link, quite frankly, John. I don't think that the weakest link may be mechanics or machines as much as it is people. If we have the right people that are dependable and motivated and disciplined and supervised properly, we'll have a much stronger system. And I'm concerned about how fast we're going to get back in the air right now before we can select and train the right people to do this.
That's a concern of the American people as well. And Jim, we appreciate your time. You've been helping us out throughout the day with your expertise on aviation, and we hope to talk to you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John.
Let me move on, if I can, to O'Hare Airport. Speaking of aviation, speaking of the difficulty of getting all the planes back in the air, the airport's running again. NBC's Kevin Tibbles is at O'Hare. We had thought that commercial airlines might be running again by noon today, Kevin, but that has not been the case. Tell us what you know.
Well, noon became 4 o'clock, 4 o'clock became 6 o'clock, and what I can tell you now, John, is that essentially there are no planes that are going to be flying today at all. There has been some suggestion that some of the planes that were diverted yesterday, say you were en route from Chicago to New York when all of the airports closed down and you had to land in Cleveland, well, then your flight may be able to continue on today and take you on from Cleveland to New York. Those are the only sorts of flights that anyone is talking about getting off the ground today. I've been here at O'Hare Airport all day long. One commercial flight has taken off. It was a United flight, and it was filled with trauma crisis workers from United headed for the Pittsburgh area to help deal with the absolute tragedy that's taking place there. No one has taken off from this airport or any other airport in this country for that matter. You know, interestingly enough, 250,000 people a day go through this airport. 1 million flights a year take off from this airport. Now, if you add on to that LAX, Atlanta, Kennedy, LaGuardia, and all the other airports, Miami and everything in between, just gives you an idea of the scope of the amount of time that Americans spend in the air over this country. And for the last 2 days, nothing has gone on. Now, I'd also like to report to you at this time, John, the FAA has come out with some new guidelines with regards to safety at the nation's airport, primarily because I said this before today, that convenience is no longer going to be a word that is going to be used in the lexicon of air travel in the United States of America. There is not going to be any more curbside check-in. You're not going to be able to be checked in by a Palm Pilot, for example, which is what happened to me the other day when I went to one of the airports here. Another thing is that many people are used to taking Swiss Army knives and the like, small knives on planes. Those things are not going to be allowed on planes anymore. Obviously, there's going to be a tremendous amount more scrutiny with regards to X-ray machines and the like. And one thing here that interests me particularly, and that is something that I found in America, is that in many airports, if you're going to meet someone at the airport, you can walk through the X-ray machine and wander all the way down to the gate, even if you don't have a ticket, even if you're not going anywhere, and you can wait and meet your friends or family members there. That practice is now going to stop. You're not going to get through the X-ray machines into the terminal proper unless you have a ticket. Now, the good point there is that you might say to yourself, well, what is that going to do? But the bottom line is that that's probably going to knock out about half of the people going through the X-ray machines, and perhaps that will free those X-ray machine operators up enough that they could perhaps be just that little bit more observant that they haven't been able to have been in the past. John?
Other than being inconvenient for Americans, this is a huge process that has to be set in motion by the airports around the nation, and we were talking about how long it would take them to get up to speed. Is there any clue about that?
I don't know the answer to that, and I am positive that people at United, based here in Chicago, and the other airlines and American and the like, are working overtime with their computer systems to get everything back on grid. You know, it's essentially that they're running a tight network of micro-managed planes. You know, at any one moment during the day, at the peak of the day, there are some 4,000 aircraft flying above the United States of America. This is a very intricate process. Many of those planes are now in the wrong place. They're going to have to deadhead a lot of planes from one place to another just so they can begin the process of getting back to normal, because they can't even start a regular schedule. Their planes aren't even in the right place, and they can't get there.
Could we talk just for a moment about the financial impact briefly, because that's just one of the aspects of this, but it is a huge financial impact on the airlines, hasn't it been?
Well,
can you hear me, Kevin? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I lost the IFB for a second there. You've come back, John. If you're asking about the financial impact on the airlines themselves, I mean, again, just take a look at it. You know, 250,000 people use this airport and pay money to fly every day just behind me here. Imagine how many flights take off and land across this country, going internationally, which, by the way, there are no international flights going in and out of here at all either. I mean, it is a billion-dollar business, and all of these planes are in the wrong place. And if you want to go by extension, as we all know, the entire financial network in New York has been shut down. The entire financial network here in Chicago has also been shut down in conjunction with that, and right across the country. So I think that there are two things to talk about here. One is that this nation is working in overdrive to get back to normal as soon as possible, to prove to those people who have done this thing that they cannot bring America to its knees. But at the other hand, I think that there's a tremendous amount of behind-the-doors accounting and perhaps deep thought going on as to how we can recover from this.
All right. NBC's Kevin Tibbles at O'Hare Airport in Chicago,
thanks, John.
Which is still quiet tonight. Kevin, thanks very much. At this hour, of course, the Capitol is preparing for a prayer vigil for the victims at the U.S. Rotunda. But in the meantime, President Bush visited the Pentagon, the site of one attack, earlier today. Let's listen to what he had to say there. Obviously, we don't have the audio portion of that's not the tape that we expected to see, but there is the President of the United States shaking hands with some of the people. Do we have Joe Johns? Well, as we mentioned, there is a prayer vigil planned at the nation's capital. NBC's Joe Johns is standing by at the Capitol to bring us up to date on that. Joe?
John, that's scheduled to go in about 5 minutes from now. We don't know if that time is going to slip. Just a little while ago, the House of Representatives decided it would give itself a couple extra hours to debate a resolution that has already been passed unanimously by the Senate condemning the terrorist acts. The House of Representatives, of course, to follow along with that. Meanwhile, here at the Capitol, there is talk, of course, behind the scenes about how do you pay for the cleanup, for the repair, for the air security that's going to be required, for the rescue crews. And we're told the number we're hearing right now, $20 billion as a down payment on that, more expected later in the next budget. There are a lot of indications that people here on Capitol Hill want to move very quickly with that.
Joe, let me just interrupt you for a second, and I'll come back to you in just a second, but I've just been handed a note, and Gloria, you can tell me in my ear whether this is the case, but we are told, we've been watching Lower Manhattan, and we are told now that a building we were watching very carefully, One Liberty Plaza, has partially collapsed, and that, that is correct, we understand, and that 3 World Trade Center is completely down. 2 other buildings that we're talking about here, in addition to the Twin Towers. One Liberty Plaza, and we'll be working on Ashley Banfield. Maybe she will be available to tell us, but Well, World Trade Center number 3 and One Liberty Plaza collapsed in Manhattan. We'll get to Ashley in just a second. This is number 3 on this map, Gloria, the building we're talking about. That's number 3 right there. And it's just to the left of number 2. Clearly, this is more bad news for rescue workers who've been searching and working very hard to try to find someone who's alive in the rubble. With the dust and the smoke created by collapse like this, the dust especially, it hampers the breathing. They're having difficulty seeing. When there's a shift in the wind, as there was today, a whole new area that was clear becomes much more difficult to work in. And we have these pictures, I believe, that show how the skyline has changed. This is the World Trade Center before the terrorist attack, and this is the skyline. This is how the skyline has changed so dramatically. Those pictures really tell the story. But since that picture that we have shown you, we've had other buildings come down. This is satellite imaging of the southern tip of Manhattan before the attack, and there's that plume of smoke that we've been talking about, and how dramatic and huge it is. If you look at it in the pictures, I mean, the live picture we've been showing you, this is from miles up. But if you look at it from the live picture, you really don't see the expanse of Manhattan Island. You see the southern tip. But when you see the whole city of Manhattan, the whole city of New York, the whole island of Manhattan, you realize how much smoke is coming over the city. And you can see it from so many different locations in the city of New York, where I was there this morning. Another live picture. There's a wider shot of that smoke, and of course it's about at dusk, but it is hanging over pretty much the whole northern part of the island of Manhattan and moving north. Dramatic pictures. Another terrible day for the city of New York. All right, I've got Brian Williams is going to come up here in just a second. Joe Johns, briefly continue your report. I've got about 30 seconds, if you would.
All right. The upshot, probably one of the most important things we picked up here, is the sense from classified intelligence briefings for members of the House and Senate. You can't get much out of anybody about what was said in there, but probably the important thing for the country is, could there be more attacks? That's the question people keep asking. And I asked a member of Congress that. He would not go there with me, but clearly gave me the indication that there is reason to still be on guard. That, of course, is something that's quite obvious, but at the same time quite ominous on this evening, Joe.
NBC's Joe Johns. Joe, thank you very much. So as we close out this half hour, the latest news is that One Liberty Plaza, another building near the World Trade Center, has partially collapsed, and number 3 World Trade Center has collapsed completely. This is a story we're going to be following through the night because, as you can see, it wasn't just the World Trade Center that was hit. Many buildings have suffered severe damage in the financial district in Lower Manhattan, and it's going to make it much tougher for those guys who are working down there tonight and in the days to come. Brian Williams is coming up next with continuing coverage here on MSNBC. I'm John Siegenthaler.
Deadly attacks which were carried out against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
huge cloud of gray came and everyone started running and stampeding and everyone was falling on the ground. But I fell down, I just covered my head. I prayed that a building would fall on me and I really thought I was going to die.
Ripping a 200-foot wide gaping hole in the Pentagon.
Oh no! Oh my God!
It's a scourge not only against the United States, but against civilization, and it must be brought to an end.
NBC News live and uninterrupted coverage continues now for those stations joining us up and down the line on the NBC television network and on MSNBC as well. Good evening once again. I'm Brian Williams, and let us now take a look at the latest stories making news as we come on the air. 7:30 Eastern Time. A 54-story building in Lower Manhattan known as One Liberty Plaza, the old U.S. Steel building, is apparently in danger of outright collapse. We have suffered a partial collapse, we're told, at this hour. It's across Broadway from the World Trade Center. Also a further collapse a few hours ago, remaining portion of what was left of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. The president has toured the Pentagon, the attack site there. He has talked to and thanked the rescue workers, met with the Secretary of Defense. More on that just moments from now. And Attorney General John Ashcroft and Press Secretary Ari Fleischer are confirming a story broken by NBC News late today that for a time yesterday, the White House and Air Force One were both considered active targets. This explains a lot of evasive flying and secrecy on the part of Air Force One and, of course, getting everybody out of the White House, including the Vice President and First Lady, who were both taken by Secret Service to safe houses. Such was the extent of the threat of attack yesterday. We also have this from space. There are stunning before and after photographs of Lower Manhattan. This screen, this frame before the attack, and then afterwards. The smoke plume is so vivid. Again, these are satellite photographs from spaceimaging.com, taken from space. It gets even more dramatic when the picture widens out and shows the entire New York metropolitan area as it spreads into the east coast of the United States. The smoke plume covering several hundred miles. Look at that, with a southern wind, prevailing wind, taking it right down from Midtown Manhattan across New York Harbor to Sandy Hook, New Jersey, and down the shoreline of Monmouth County, New Jersey. Again, from outer space. You see there clearly the outline of the New York coastline, including Long Island, New York. That is an extraordinary sight, as it is from the ground. Just over these past few hours, the president has ventured outside of the White House. There is the extent of the damage in New York, the Twin Towers missing from the city skyline, and the damage equally horrific at the Pentagon in Washington. The president, as we say, has ventured across the Potomac River from the White House to the Pentagon and has visited with the rescue workers there, many of whom have yet to bed down for the night after working through the night last night. Veteran NBC News correspondent John Palmer standing by for us at the Pentagon. John, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. The president said today when he visited the Pentagon he was both sad, but he was also very angry, and that seems to be the feeling of many people at the Pentagon. Tonight, for the second night in a row, under searchlights, rescuers, now searchers, are going through the debris, seeing what they can find. There's no real hope. There hasn't been for some hours now that anyone will be found alive. The good news, though, is that the estimated fatalities in this disaster have been revised downward from an 800 or so figure down to maybe 150 or 200. The president visited here for about 30 minutes this afternoon, greeting the workers and meeting with officials in the Pentagon. Here's part of what the president had to say.
First of all, I must tell you, I am overwhelmed by the devastation. I am so grateful for the people who are working here. We're here to say thanks to not only the workers on this site, but the workers who are doing the same work in New York City. I want to say thanks to the folks who have given blood to the Red Cross. I want to say thanks for the hundreds and thousands of Americans who pray for the victims and their families. Secretary Rumsfeld told me when I talked to him that he felt the blast shake the Pentagon. Even though he was on the other side of the building rocked. And now I know why. Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry. And our country will, however, not be cowed by terrorists, by people who don't share the same values we share, by people who are willing to destroy people's lives because we embrace freedom. And, our nation mourns, but our government will go on. Our country will function. We're on high alert for any possible activity. But coming here confirms what the Secretary and I both know, that this is a great nation. The people here working hard prove it. People out here working their hearts out to answer families' questions, to remove the rubble and debris from this awful scene. And again, thank everybody, not only in this site, but all across America, who are responding so generously, so kindly in their prayers, and their contributions of blood, and their willingness to help in any way they can.
President Bush, in comments to reporters during a visit, about a 30-minute visit this afternoon here at the Pentagon to view the devastation. Earlier, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld said, we are seeing the definition of a new battlefield, a 21st century battlefield in this battle against terrorism. Brian?
John Palmer at the Pentagon for us tonight. Thanks. We are joined by one of the President's cabinet secretaries, former governor, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson of the state of Wisconsin. He can talk about the resources the government is now being forced to make available for these tragedies. And unfortunately, Mr. Secretary, we have some practice in this, having been through Oklahoma City and other disasters.
That's very true, Brian, and it's really sad, but it's so important for the people in New York City and Washington, D.C. to know that their government is fully behind them. Tomorrow, the Congress is going to pass an appropriation supplemental bill of about $20 billion that's going to allow for the federal dollars to flow into New York City and Washington, D.C. to repair and rebuild. And in my department, we've sent up a lot of medical resources into New York City. 5 medical teams and 4 mortuaries. We're sending up 83,000 IV units and 400 ventilators. And we're also have put on alert the 6,000 members of our Army Commissioned Corps, Medical Corps, that's going to be able to go into any place that New York City or Washington, D.C. requires. It's sad, but it's necessary.
Mr. Secretary, do you have any numbers? Just talked to a gentleman with an accounting firm down in that area, worked in the World Trade Center. They're not sure. They don't have all their employees accounted for. Are you going on any data?
Well, we have a lot of data, but I think anything dealing with missing people, missing persons, or fatalities has got to come from the individuals in the city of New York or Washington, D.C. I don't think anybody else should speculate. Those are the individuals that are going to have to do it. We'll be setting up our mortuaries in New York City, and we will be taking the overflow that the city morgue cannot handle.
Strikes me we're talking about creating a whole separate infrastructure for this. Talk of mortuaries, temporary morgues. Are we going to be at this, safe to say, for weeks?
I would say it's going to be several weeks, Brian. There's going to take a long time to get all of the individuals out of that rubble. There's going to have to be some DNA testing. That may be the only way that we'll be able to identify several of these individuals. And it's sad, but it has to be done. And we're going to stay there till everything gets done. Every person is identified and accounted for. And that's going to take several weeks. And that's what is so heartbreaking for all of the families out there. And that's what concerns the president and myself so much.
This may take you out of the area of health and human services per se, but there's a whole lot of anger out there, and what could almost be called a thirst for retribution. And if we're going to be at this for weeks, and this long and drawn-out process of families waiting for word, of dental records, of waiting for the worst, what to do, what to say to the American people during it all?
Well, we found from our experience in Oklahoma City that there's going to have to be a lot of counseling. We have made available a lot of our psychologists and psychiatrists who will be going up to New York City and the New York area to counsel families and especially children. And that's so important to make sure that that's available. And we're fully ready and able to do that. And we're also, of course, got a lot of our individuals from CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, to take a look at air quality and water quality to make sure that we do not have any breakouts of any kinds of infections or any other kind of diseases. So we're getting prepared. We got a plan in place, and it's being implemented, Brian.
Is there a target as to when you want all basic human needs met in the city of New York and in Washington as a result of the Pentagon blast?
We would like to have everything taken care of as soon as possible. We don't put any time frame on it because we just don't know. We're in consultation with the mayor and the governor of New York and also the officials in Washington. And anything these individuals need, we will make available. The full force of the federal government, as the president has said, is available. And tomorrow Congress will pass, we believe, a supplemental appropriation bill of $20 billion, which will set aside the dollars necessary to make sure all the resources are there for every person that's being hurt by this terrible, terrible terrorist attack.
Tommy Thompson of HHS. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for coming on with us tonight.
Thank you, Brian.
As people may have heard during this day, the FBI has discovered alleged terrorist attended a flight school in Florida, and we have correspondent Kerry Sanders with us tonight from North Miami, Florida, with more on this. Kerry?
Well, we're outside the FBI headquarters where it's been a very busy day. We understand that a material witness was flown into South Florida today and brought over here by the agents and is still, we believe, inside the FBI headquarters here. What role that person is going to play is still uncertain. But the FBI agents on the counterterrorism group have been looking very closely at one person on the flight manifest. When they saw his name, they knew this name. It was a name familiar to them, Mohammed Atta, a name that was familiar to them because it's believed that he was involved in the bombing of a bus in Israel in 1986.
33-year-old Mohammed Atta on the flight manifest of one of the suicide flights. One of those who the FBI suspects took the controls of the hijacked jet. Where did he learn to fly? Venice, Florida. Visited today by FBI agents who carted away at least 8 boxes of records. NBC News has learned those records show Atta and his cousin Marwan al-Shahi spent 7 months in training here. Employees at the flight school say money never seemed to be an issue for them. The cost, $25,000 each to get a commercial flight rating. The plane Atta and his cousin flew to get their FAA certification. The FAA's designated pilot examiner says he barely remembers either man from their 3 flight tests late last year. Dave Whitman says while neither could fully command a 757 or 767 with their flight experience, they could take control in the air and easily direct a jet like that into a target.
As far as just flying the airplane, such as driving it around the sky, it's not that much different.
Were Atta and his cousin legally in this country? That's something the FBI is now tracing. But flight school owner Rudy Deckkers says he was suspicious.
We don't think that these people came in a normal way, not that we can know that. But the normal way is that they get a permit to enter. And a few of them are in reviews in the last couple of years, and that's okay by us. These people came at our door and wanted to get training done. And you know, what can you do? I mean, for us, it's a customer.
The FBI today visiting an apartment in Coral Springs, Florida, where Atta once lived.
Can you tell us if you found anything?
No, ma'am, no comments today.
At the same time, in Hamburg, Germany, another address used by Atta. Police there leaving with evidence. By all accounts, in Germany and in Florida, Atta and his cousin kept to themselves, except for last Thursday at this bar in Hollywood, Florida. It's believed both men came in, drank heavily, and then refused to pay the bill. FBI agents showing Atta's passport photo to bar staff and listening to the manager recount the argument.
If there's an issue where you can't pay your bill or something, just tell me, okay? Let's stop, you know, let's cut to the chase here. And the guy got like very, very offended, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, I can pay my bill. I'm an airline pilot." And I was like, "Okay." And that's what I told the FBI agents, and they were like, "Oh, really?"
So the FBI agents are now a short distance away from that scene in Hollywood at another location in Hollywood where they are serving yet another federal search warrant. They emerged from the apartment complex in Hollywood at that location with 4 brown bags. We're not sure what they took from the inside. There are still some local police investigators there from the crime scene unit from the Broward Sheriff's Office, as well as the Hollywood Police Department, which are assisting the FBI in the investigation. And it's kind of dark here, but there's a fair amount of comings and goings here, and in many places, as here, there are armed guards posted with heavy machinery. The gun they're holding over there, I think it's an M4, but the guns they're holding are at a lot of locations and somewhat intimidating. Brian?
Kerry Sanders from North Hollywood, Florida tonight. Thank you for that report, and we're joined by telephone now by one of the gentlemen you saw in Kerry's setup piece, Rudy Deckkers, the head of Huffman Aviation there. Mr. Deckkers, one thing is confusing. Run through again, what was the largest aircraft these men, or this man trained on?
The largest aircraft, good evening, was a Piper Seneca 2. It's a 6-seater, 2-engine plane, categorized at 4,000 pounds. It's very light airplane.
So from learning the gauges on a twin prop like a Seneca, what translates from that would give you the ability to at least take over in mid-flight a 7.5 or a 7.6 twin-engine commercial jetliner?
Well, we've been asking ourselves the same questions. The only thing is you understand an airplane better than you don't know anything about flying. The systems are totally different. The instruments are totally different. I have heard from captains from the airlines that there's no way, if they fly a little plane, that they can fly a Boeing. No way. I can tell you that the difference because we only train in the little stuff. We do learn today that after they flew with us in the single and in the small multi-engine that they left in November after getting their licenses from the U.S. government, that they left to another flight school where they obtained jet training.
Ah, okay. Well, that may be the missing link here. As perverse as it sounds, it has been said over the past 24 hours that, and as gross a notion as what was perpetrated here, it is hard to do what some of these pilots did. It is, in some cases, hard to go from a cruising speed and altitude to hit a target like World Trade with a big commercial jetliner. And if you don't know rudders and ailerons and throttle on a big commercial airliner, that would be tough.
Well, as I say, we don't know anything about the big planes other than there were sometimes passengers. They were trained in the small planes. They left to another company. Apparently, we learned that today. I was just the first step with my flight school in Venice where they obtained flight training. They walked into the front door. They were not happy with another flight school, and they choose our facility to finalize their training. One of the guys, the Atta guy, already had pilot license, obtained somewhere else, and they just finalized their training. I have heard on your station calling $25,000 a student. It was $10,000, and they stayed from June till till November when they did with Whitman the flight test.
And as you say in your defense, it is not as if people like that come in and announce themselves as potential terrorists. You see them as not knowing any other motive as potential customers.
Well, of course, and all my employees today are shocked because what they do, they try to give their customer service, and nobody had any idea, feeling. Everybody is asking themselves, what could we have known to see this? What could we have done? Nobody knew. We were serving the customer. We took copies of their passports. The FBI was happy that we had a file with all kinds of copies and also from the passports. We don't need to do that, but we did that because, you know, we want to have a file. If something happens with a student, you can call somebody back home. We are in a shock, more as the rest of the world right now, because it's at our doorsteps. It's not just 2,000 miles away.
I understand, and I want to thank you for coming on the air with us tonight. We learned a lot more now having talked to you. Rudy Deckkers, Huffman Aviation, Venice, Florida. My colleague Lester Holt is here with me on the set. He has just arrived back. Viewers earlier heard him reporting by phone from what's become known as Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan. Lester, you're just back. What did you see?
Well, we got there by water, which is the pretty much the only way you can get there. As you know, part of Manhattan is closed. As you get closer to Ground Zero, we walked our way through what is the World Financial Center, and then came around the corner, and there you see Ground Zero. We have some tape. Let's roll it. And I haven't seen how we edited it, but this is what we saw. We saw the windows blown out. I'm not sure which building we're looking at here. This is not the south. There's the South Tower. There's
the spine of the old world.
And that's what we're talking about, Brian. It's just a spine just hanging there, ready to come down. And below that are the equivalent of several stories of rubble. These are iron workers just standing there. I talked to some of these men who had arrived only in just the last hour or so. I got a sense there are still some organizational issues there. A lot of folks, you know, who's the contractor? They were coming up to me. Who's the general? Who's the supervisor? What do you need? These are people, steel workers, people who work in shoring up things. In fact, that's me, I think, reporting to you live earlier on the phone. I recorded some of my thoughts as we walked through the rubble. Why don't we roll that tape and listen?
If you don't think this is personal, look at some of the messages that rescuers and volunteers have put up. I have seen war today. This one says, "Hey Bush, how about a little action? Come over this way. I want to show you this truck. What's left of look at this fire truck. Just turn about. Say that again. Yeah. Have a look at this fire truck here. It's just utterly destroyed. Look at that. Over here, a full block. Over here, a full block from the Trade Center. Look at the stack of cars that were just tossed into this intersection here. Just literally tossed there. Cars hurling through the air. Many of these are people that have come from all over the East, all over the country. Volunteers, construction workers, rescuers, firefighters. This job is so immense. It's a rescue effort, but it's going to be a difficult one. I want you to look at how tall the wreckage. That's the South Tower.
And that's one of the tapes we saw, we looked at. Brian, one of the things that struck me most, and maybe we'll get that tape together in a bit, was there was one block along the West Side Highway where these fire trucks and ambulances had responded. We saw ambulance after ambulance on its side crushed. There was those orange litters, the backboards, sticking out of the wreckage. You look at that, you look at the rubble, and you can put two and two together. These were the crews that made that initial response when it was just a report of a plane into a building and a fire. And then, of course, the building comes down, and you think, well, were they with the vehicle? Were they in the lobby of the building when this came crashing down? But that's the picture that really strikes me, that just that skeleton.
Right, and it's a familiar metal work, because anyone who ever saw the World Trade Center knows that kind of wide, tight spine work was one of the trademarks of the outside of the building.
And one of the other things we saw now, this is about a block from the Hudson River. They've got A lot of boats have been called into action to haul people, haul construction workers back and forth. They were carrying victims away yesterday. The harbor is officially shut down to all but emergency traffic. There are Coast Guard boats strategically positioned, big ones with guns on them in the harbor there, kind of forming a picket line, if you will, protecting lower Manhattan. And then the fire boats are actually pumping water out of the Hudson and feeding it. Walking through the area, my producer Kim Cornett said it was like walking on soft, like a beach. I liken it more to like a shag carpet. It's just this thick. There are huge, huge pieces of metal, light fixtures. There are photographs on the ground. There are pieces of paper from the various companies. There was a Merrill Lynch thing. There was somebody's retirement picture. These are personal business items, but they reflect a lifeblood of the city, business, personal, and there they are just lying in the dust.
All gone forever. I need not remind you of this, but you brought this up, the cruelty of it. The first impact, people respond to a report of a plane into the first tower. Then comes the second impact. Then we know what we have. It's a terrorist attack, and then the collapse in order of both of them. So each of those incidents puts more rescue people up into the infrastructure. Thankfully, it did get more of the tenants out. But what a mess, and how many firefighters we're talking about potentially in there.
And you know, you can't think about it. There is people talk about the silence there. There is a silence. These workers, the firefighters, you know, are huddled together. You know, they've been through hell. People are looking, and I found myself, and we've got better pictures. I hope to get them on later on. But that wreckage where that building came down, I'm estimating 6-7 stories deep. If you think for a moment what is beneath that wreckage, you just cringe.
Yeah, you can't almost.
You can't. I had to look away thinking, okay, just don't even think about it.
And the rescue workers can't afford to do that because they got to keep their eyes on the prize here, which is maybe one life if they can do it, if they can get to a whimper, a report of a survivor. And otherwise it becomes a salvage.
And when I was there, and as we later saw, there was danger of more collapses around. So the iron workers, everybody being kept back. Firemen were on the bullhorn and said, "Look, you know, we've got to see where we stand with the security here." There wasn't much in the way of searching going on. I heard your conversation with Tommy Thompson, the secretary, a few moments ago. It is going to be, just from my untrained eye, it is going to be weeks, Brian, before we begin to learn what price was paid.
Well, Lester, thank you. We know you've been doing your share of hours here, and then the live report from Lower Manhattan tonight, and we appreciate you coming back with what you came back with. We're going to close just this half hour as our live coverage continues with a scene we want to show you in its entirety tonight. There are going to be several gatherings, obviously, in the days and weeks that come. One of them was last night, an impromptu singing of God Bless America. Tonight, it was congressional leaders in the rotunda of the Capitol in Washington, which has seen so much history, singing the national anthem and other songs. NBC News live coverage continues.
Shaking, shaking. girl got frightened.
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building.
The 4 planes were hijacked by between 3 and 6 individuals per plane, using knives and box cutters, in some cases making bomb threats.
Deliberate and deadly attacks, which were carried out yesterday against our country, were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
How are you doing? Well, I'm trying to hold up, trying to look for her and everything, but my kids are home, and I got 2 little girls home.
He's been pinned since the event. He was discovered during the night, and it took them several hours to get him out after they had identified him.
It's mayhem. It's like something out of a movie.
This is life-changing. There's no doubt about it.
It is the night after what has become almost a perpetual cloud over lower Manhattan continues tonight. The night after the explosions, and yet in New York and Washington, still very much an emergency, a crisis footing. A very, very difficult day for all the people gathering the news you are about to see this evening, the men and women of NBC News, producers, correspondents, camera crews. It is nothing compared to the heartache being suffered by countless thousands of families in the New York and Washington area who are missing loved ones so far unaccounted for in what is a pile of ruin in New York. Good evening to you just after 8 p.m. as we come on the air tonight. And here is the news at this hour. Another structure near collapse, lower Manhattan. This one known to some old-timers as the U.S. Steel Building, officially One Liberty Plaza. World Trade number 3 went down today. Liberty Plaza showing signs that a collapse may be imminent, the kind of groaning and window splattering that can happen as this kind of thing nears. The president has spoken today twice, once from the White House, once during a tour of the Pentagon this evening, saying again what has happened here is, make no mistake, an act of war. And late today he thanked the rescuers, people doing the nuts and bolts search work over at the Pentagon. And there were speeches on the floor of the Senate late today, chief among them one by John McCain, the Republican of Arizona, who said, in effect, we know who did this. We know who you are. It is time to flex some muscle, fight back, and go get him. As specifically, he called on Afghanistan to extradite Osama bin Laden. A day of many events. We have our eye on all fronts. Again, that perpetual cloud over lower Manhattan, where another building collapse may be imminent. The perverse side of this story is the act of terrorists yesterday continues to affect this country, specifically the city of New York tonight. We will get to all aspects of this story later on in this evening, specifically things like transportation, all the developments across the country caused by this horrific day of violence. Now to the rest of this day's developments. As we look at the floodlit scene in lower Manhattan, it was again an unprecedented, surreal day across the United States. And for that, NBC News correspondent David Bloom.
As the day wears on, dump trucks and heavy equipment haul tons of debris from the toppled Twin Towers. Emotions grow taut. Exhausted New York City firefighters scouring the World Trade Center wreckage for victims, including hundreds of their colleagues missing, presumed dead.
We were there till 3 o'clock in the morning, but it's like Planet of the Apes. You got 200 guys dead. Whoever did it, they should kill the bastards that did it, period.
What does it do to you knowing that there are 200 of your brothers dead under there?
There's 200 guys. The guy that relieved me is dead. No, I can't do it.
New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, conflicting earlier accounts, says only 4 people have been pulled from the rubble alive. 2 police officers, a firefighter, and then this afternoon,
a woman who was found still alive, taken to the hospital. So now there are at least 4 people that we've been able to take out. We're searching for others.
Addressing the nation for the 4th time in 2 days, the president says the attacks
were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
And tonight the country is on a war footing. Military troops patrolling the nation's capital.
That U-Haul over there.
National Guardsmen on the streets of New York. A Navy aircraft carrier, the USS George Washington, off Long Island.
The stock market shut down until at least Friday. Airports still closed. Only a few planes, diverted after Tuesday's attacks, allowed to fly. In Manhattan, as the wind shifts, the cloud of smoke drifts north, the sawdust-like powder choking rescue workers and passers-by. And late today, what emergency workers fear most, the heap of rubble that remained from the World Trade Center's South Tower collapses. Authorities afraid that even as this rescue proceeds cautiously, still more lives could be lost.
And that's where things were left late today, with the collapse of yet another building, and still yet another collapse may be near. And for that, we are joined live from Lower Manhattan by NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson. Ann, good evening to you.
Good evening, Brian. It is just after 8, and you're seeing a shift change here among the police and some of the rescue workers who have put in another long, very difficult day. But as you said, the concern tonight continues to be One Liberty Plaza. Let me show you where it is. We are on Church Street, and if you look back behind me in the darkness, you can see just a few lights in this 50-story building. That is the building that they have been very, very worried about since about 5:30 tonight, when people at the scene detected a shift in the building. And at that time, we saw a mass exodus of rescue workers, of firefighters, of transit workers, all coming out of here, heavy equipment too, coming down Church Street, trying to get out of the way of a building that they feared might collapse. Well, just within the last 15 minutes, police on the scene, some police have been telling NBC News that the fire department appears to have determined that One Liberty Plaza appears to be structurally sound. And within the last few minutes, we have seen more heavy equipment head up Church Street, head back to the attack site. Dump trucks in particular going back there to help remove debris from the towers that have already fallen. Brian?
The pieces of heavy equipment are limited sometimes by just the pure amount of floor space they have to move around. It's a gingerly effort because they have heard sounds of potential survivors in there. Just what is that like?
Brian, you know, it's not just the fact that they're hearing sounds. I was talking to some firefighters from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, who made the 700-mile trek here. They drove all night, and they said they got to the site and they were just stunned by the enormity of it. They said at the scene, they said there's really sort of no command and control. They said it's almost a free-for-all. Everybody trying to do something to try to find people. When they do find people, they say that effort is very organized. I was talking to some firefighters earlier today from Farmingdale, New York, who said that they actually set up what looks to be an assembly line. Once they find somebody, they go down into the area and then they pass that person up, one fireman at a time, usually on a stretcher, anything to get those people out of there. As for what they're actually seeing when they go into the site, I talked to one firefighter who went into the basement of the World Trade Center today in the mall area, and he said he thinks he was in what appears to be a Victoria's Secret store. He was in the lotions and perfume area. And he said what struck him about that was on one side of the store there was all this shattered glass, all this destruction. And on the other side of the store, the glass shelves were perfectly intact, and so were the products, which gives you an idea of some of the randomness of the terror that hit here yesterday.
Ann Thompson, having spent day 2 down in that area for us. Ann, thank you for that tonight. We are joined this evening by Steve Emerson, a terrorism expert, investigative project director, an expert, by the way, in Islamic extremism and counterterrorism. He will be with us in just a moment. First, NBC News Justice Department, Pete Williams, Justice correspondent, rather, Pete Williams, on what we know about the investigation so far.
Federal agents respond immediately. More than 4,000 FBI special agents and 3,000 support staff already on the case, sweeping the nation for evidence from fragments at the scene of the attacks to any documentary proof of what the suspected terrorists were up to. Between 3 and 6 per plane, authorities now say.
The United States Attorney's Office's terrorism units and the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Forces are obtaining the passenger manifests, rental car receipts, telephone logs, videotape from parking garages, and pay telephone videotape records at all scenes for review and appropriate follow-up interviews.
Scrutiny of those passenger lists leads the FBI to this flight school in Florida, where officials say they believe at least 2 of the terrorists received pilot training during the past year. A man who worked at the flight school says he allowed both of them, who described themselves as Germans, to briefly live with him and his wife.
While they were here, I know that they had used this address initially, and I know that because I would get insurance renewals for them addressed to them at this address for that call.
In Boston, agents swarm area hotels where registration records match suspicious names from passenger lists of the hijacked planes, detaining at least 3 people for further questioning, holding them now on immigration charges. And in a hugely helpful break, the FBI impounds a car found at the airport after a witness says it was driven by 2 Arabic men. In it, authorities say they discover airplane technical documents. Federal agents also stop an Amtrak train in Rhode Island today, part of a frantic nationwide effort, the FBI says, to make certain no other conspirators remain at large where they could mount further attacks.
Our first effort is to identify any associates in the United States who might be related to the hijackers and to remove those associates, investigate, and arrest, given the evidence, those individuals, and to remove any threat to the air system in the future.
Among other searches today, agents descend upon this mailbox rental office in New Jersey, where some of the suspected terrorists may have received their mail.
Correspondent Pete Williams, who is heading up our team looking into this investigation. I mentioned this earlier. We're joined by Steve Emerson, who is an expert in all of this. Steve, what does it mean to you that the security system in this country was violated to the tune of 3 to 6 hijackers per aircraft?
It means that these groups have been able to function under our radar system in quotes, meaning under our ability to detect them. They've been able to use existing infrastructures, use the very freedoms of the United States to carry out these attacks. It means that in the future, we're going to have to change the threshold for FBI and other law enforcement agents to carry out surveillance against those who are illegally here, or those who advocate violence, or those who are suspected of having ties to terrorist organizations. Clearly, the FBI's hands, and I can tell you this personally, having dealt with the FBI extensively over the last 5 years while they have investigated militant Islamic groups on American soil, their hands have been tied. And I think now maybe there's going to be an opportunity to untie those hands.
How do you kind of crack down on security, step up surveillance, things like that, without running up against the Bill of Rights? That's a problem we have run up against before in this country.
Look, I think that there's no magical dividing line here. I mean, if we look at European countries, they are very democratic, but they are much more intrusive in what they allow law enforcement to do because there's been a greater level of violence on their soil. The Bill of Rights doesn't give the right of terrorists, Islamic fundamentalists, whoever, to carry out deadly attacks that kill 10,000 Americans. And I think there's going to be a fine balance, but one that shifts the pendulum toward the ability to be more intrusive. Look, people are going to have to put up with more in terms of putting their baggage, not through advanced curb submissions at airports, but taking it up to the counters. They're going to have more detailed inspections. They're going to have to go through personal intrusions. And I think that's the price Americans will pay for this protection.
It is said that when flights do resume in this country, that someone said today that even purses would be considered too big a carry-on, that people would only be allowed something the size of, say, a wallet. Do you think that kind of policy is here to stay? And what doesn't that take care of?
Well, I must tell you that when the whole issue of X-ray equipment and issues of preventing airlines from being hijacked or being bombed, when the whole policy of security was instituted, it was much more stringent than it was in up until the last couple of days. And that's because we got accustomed to the notion that terrorists weren't going to use the airline. So we got lax. The fact is, I think Americans will put up with the high degree of inspection, intrusion, delays, and I think we'll see much longer lines at airports. You'll have to board 3 to 4 hours ahead for some flights. That's what the Israelis do right now, and they've had a perfect record. So I think that's going to be it's definitely one of the conclusions. But I also think that politically, we're going to have to embark on a different policy towards the existence of groups in the United States that advocate violence or that are tethered ideologically, even though that's a free speech issue, to the very groups that have carried out this bombing.
How do you, this goes back to the Bill of Rights question. In World War II, we rounded up Japanese and put them in internment camps during the war, and we debated it, but the Supreme Court ruled on it, one of the great mistakes of that body, and it happened. And not that this is of that scale, but perhaps in microcosm it is.
I don't think anybody is advocating, and I'm certainly not advocating, rounding up innocent people who have no connection at all to terrorist groups or tethered or not tethered to those groups. The issue is having the clinical evidence. I can tell you there are times when FBI agents and other law enforcement agents have known about incoming terrorists into the United States, or have spoken at gatherings from Egypt, from Algeria and elsewhere, have called for jihad against the United States, but they have not been allowed to go in and do any surveillance against these groups. That's what I'm talking about, going after the very militant groups that advocate violence. It's listening to their words, watching their movements, and not giving the protections to illegal aliens that have abused their privileges by coming in on American soil and claiming they're entitled to the Bill of Rights. They're not.
Steve Emerson, thank you very much for coming on. Tough topic, and it's going to call for some action here shortly. We'll perhaps have you back to keep this conversation going. We want to share with our viewers dramatic images have been coming in, of course, all day long. But a couple in particular caught our eye. Look at this from space. This is the smoke plume. Again, it has become, since yesterday, almost perpetual. It is a mix